And we're live, Super Spreaders, and I've got odd hair due to my headphones. Enjneer and Rhain here with Super Spreaders, and we are super excited tonight to be hosting Deanna McLeod of COVID Sense, and has famously given the Canadian COVID Care Alliance's presentation to the coronavirus or Corona Investigative Committee's grand jury, which everyone should head over to Gettr, find, and watch as soon as possible. But there's 7 5-hour days of testimony by experts, and that's where we discovered Deanna McLeod giving this presentation, and we asked her to come on here and give it again, except with a much wider time expanse and the ability for us to ask questions. This is our premiere live stream on Rumble. Let's get a banner going here. That is our Rumble, shockingly named Super Spreaders. And everyone, please head over to Rumble and sign up. We just got turned down for monetization due to harmful content. They didn't tell us what was harmful, but we have harmful content on our channel and they will not monetize us. So we know it's just a big game, and especially with topics like today being covered, it's a matter of time before they get rid of us completely. We need to move on to the alt platforms like Rumble and build up our following there. So everyone that appreciates us here, please move over to Rumble, and we're streaming live right there. There's a great benefit on Rumble with the Rumble rants, which is their chats. You can do super chats there. Anyone putting in $2 or more tonight to the cause will get to ask Deanna a question that is poignant to the topic at hand. You know, well, what's your favorite color we might allow, but we'll take any professional, suitable question to Deanna and pose it to her if you do a paid rant over on Rumble. And let's get ourselves off this Facebook thing. Rhain, how's things up in Yukon?
Pretty good. Starting to get a little bit warmer, but still winter.
Get sunshine all day yet?
Yeah, it's probably daylight till close to 9 o'clock now at night. So
yeah.
It's nice.
Yeah, that's the strangest thing about the Yukon. I visited up there, and in the summertime, you just decide when it's night, and you just go to bed.
Yeah, it's never.
All right, with no further ado, we'll bring on Deanna McLeod, and we'll get to meet her. Hi, Deanna.
Hey, how are you? Hi. Hey, Rhain.
Good. Thank you for coming on. The bona fides I have for you are founder and principal of Kaleidoscope Strategic. You're a clinical analyst, right?
Yeah.
You help doctors sift through clinical data.
Yeah. So I had an organization. It's a medical research firm, and we have a team of PhDs, doctors who basically crunch data with me, and our organization basically helps specialists, specifically in oncology, sort through things and develop guidelines. So we specialize in going through data. And I think one of the unique perspectives that I bring to the table is that I was actually from industry. I spent about 10 years there. I did some time in marketing, sales, and the medical side of things. And one of the things that I noticed towards the end of the 90s was that there was some biased reporting. And I really wanted to get to a place where I could, do independent, evidence-based, balanced, objective reviews of treatments that weren't tainted by any bias. And so that's when we launched the firm in 2000, and we've been doing that ever since. So we've published about 40 peer-reviewed publications with doctors specifically related to cancer, making sure that everything that's recommended is based on the evidence. So in March 2020, when we saw the COVID thing happening, of course, our natural inclination was to start to do an independent evaluation of the data, not trust what the talking heads were saying, but kind of dig in for ourselves. And so we've spent about 2,000 hours as an organization, basically analyzing COVID data and trying to get to the bottom of what's happening. And that was basically the genesis of the More Harm Than Good presentation. That's a summary of the analysis that our company did.
Amazing.
on the COVID data.
so Kaleidoscope is created to kind of make a bit of a buffer because you already kind of felt that studies were starting to maybe not be reliable just in and of themselves.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that you have to look at whenever you're analyzing data is what the conflict of interest is, right? So, one would assume and one would hope that a study is being designed to help and benefit the patient and that the benefits will outweigh the risks. But, what you really need to understand is that there's other forces at play. And when pharma is involved, they've got a bottom line that they need to serve. And so there definitely is a temptation to, minimize risk and enhance benefits. That's something that's known. And there's some companies that do that more than others. Some are pretty great, some aren't. Sometimes it hits some certain therapeutic areas a little bit more than others. And because vaccines are particularly big business, I think that the temptation to skew the data might be a little bit stronger in that particular area. And we've definitely seen a strong bias in the COVID-19 vaccine data.
Right. When this all started going down and Operation Warp Speed starts getting going and they're doing the testing and then we're quickly moving into announcement of a successful vaccine, this in your field, you must have just been like, whoa, what? It must have been a bit of a like, well, let's look into this because this is moving so fast.
It was actually kind of interesting because, there's something called pre-marketing work that companies do. And pre-marketing work is something where they spend a lot of money upfront before their product's even launched. And that work is designed to basically highlight a clinical need. So they basically spend a lot of money trying to convince people that they have a problem and that ultimately when their drug comes along, that they will be the ones to solve the problem. Do you know what I mean? So they're already selling it beforehand. And so one of the things that I noticed right out of the gate was that the whole, COVID-19 alarm bells where they're looking at cumulative cases and they've got dashboards that are lit up with, red dots, and the headlines are like, everybody's dying. Mm-hmm. I was like, oh, look, some pre-marketing work. Somebody's doing. The global companies are getting ready to sell something. I wonder what it is, right?
Right.
And so I, we started looking around, going, okay, so let's see it. What's coming down? And of course, then, I think it was in September, before maybe even any of these trials were even launched. They're like, vaccines are the only way, And then of course they started pouring in money for what is it? It was the label, at least in Canada, was called to reduce vaccine hesitancy. And they started pouring in millions of dollars, right? So what that is, it is basically tainting the pot of discourse. So they're going to basically polarize the settings so that they, can sell their drugs more. And so I was like, oh, look at some more pre-market activity. So then, of course, and at that point, I have to say, I'm just going to be completely honest. I was getting a little tired of the lockdowns. And I was like, okay, if I just have to take a vaccine to get out of my house, like, I'll do it. Like, this is ridiculous. It's gone on for too long, right? And so then our group was like, you know what, we should probably take a look at that vaccine data before we do that.
Yeah.
And then that's kind of when we took a look at it, and I can show you some figures, but our response was, what are they doing giving chemotherapy to healthy people? That's right. When we looked at the side effects profile, I mean, we work with biologics, immunomodulators and things like that, and we were like, okay, why are they giving something that is so toxic to people who are healthy? And in cancer, we're particularly sensitive to safety profiles because, the idea there is, even if somebody is dying of cancer and they only have a few months to live, those are precious months, and we definitely never want to compromise their quality of life.
Yeah.
However, the rule goes that if you move into healthy populations, the standard of safety should go way, way up, because they've got many quality life years ahead of them, and you never want to cause an injury that then somebody will have to suffer through. So you have to make sure that the benefits are bulletproof and that the safety is solid. So when they said they developed a vaccine in a few months, I was like, I got to see this. Yeah. Can't see any safety data that goes on for 2 months that's very compelling.
I know. Right. I hear a lot. I remember it's often brought up the swine flu in the 70s and their rush to do a vaccine, and that complete failure is brought up by people on the skeptical side often to say why we should be more careful about this vaccine. Counter argument goes is that, oh, well, there was only this many deaths compared to this, and there weren't that many cases. And my response is always just like, if there's one death, if you're that death, it's the trade-off isn't there. I died.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, I didn't get the flu, but I died.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
The need for safety here has been just hand waved away,
Well,
to a remarkable extent. I just can't see how we even got here. Although I can see how we got here, but
I think that
pre-marketing.
Yeah, I think that one of the things you really, really need to remember is that what's happening here with the pandemic is kind of big business on steroids. And I'm going to just explain the market dynamics. So I work in oncology, and oncology, I'm just going to use technical terms like the buzzwords, but of course these are all people, so there's some sensitivity there. But it's what the companies would call a big market, because people who are dying of cancer are very compelled to want to treat, right? Mm-hmm. So, and if you can convince them that you have a treatment that works, then they'll use the treatment. So that's good business, and there's a big demand for treatments for cancer. However, from a business standpoint, and I'm just using the terminology that they use, it's a small market because the people are only going to take the drug for a short time and then they're going to die. Yeah. Right? So, and there's only so many people who have cancer. Now, the biggest possible market would be people, somebody who's just detected some disease. Let's just call them an early cancer patient. And then you want to give them something to prevent the disease from coming back, right? So then that would be a bigger market. But the ultimate market is to treat healthy people and to have to treat them repeatedly. Thus, a vaccine is huge big business, and a vaccine that you have to re-administer every 3 to 4 months is it's the holy grail of pharmaceutical marketing. It is the pentultimate prize. So if we're noticing that there's a lot of, if there's some extreme measures happening, it's because there's a lot of money on the line. This is really, really big business, and it's being coordinated at a global level. So you've got global coordination among pharmaceutical companies and, collaboration with governments. They've made lots of infiltrations into governments in the sense that now governments, especially public health authorities, feel that their job is to administer vaccines as one of their main tools. And then all of a sudden a pandemic comes along, they build their market with fear, and then they prime their gun with these things. Now, mRNA technology is particularly attractive because one of the major costs in developing a vaccine is basically manufacturing, and there's very little manufacturing cost with mRNA vaccines. It's kind of like a 3D printer for genes. You just get the 3D printer primed up, and then basically, so you've got, and then if you can convince the government to do all your marketing for you, right? Then basically for a pharmaceutical company, you don't, the government's doing the pre-marketing, so you don't have those costs, right? The government, then basically you run a trial, but the government's going to help you cut it short, only 2 months, right? So then you don't have the cost of your trial, right? You don't have manufacturing costs because they basically, not standardized, and they're not holding you to a high bar. And then of course it's also mRNA technology, so that's not a high bar. And then afterwards, the post-marketing stuff, they're even doing their post-marketing surveillance for them, right? So from a pharmaceutical company, like this is like, I can't even think of a better prize, like the strongest possible market. Like this is a prize. This is why everybody's going for it.
It's a market that, as Ottawa has shown, they're willing to inflate by force.
Well, yeah, and that's actually pretty interesting. I've never really quite understood why there's such a strong motivation on the part of the government to mandate, vaccines. That wouldn't come from a pharmaceutical point of view, right? That doesn't make sense from a pharmaceutical point of view. So then you'd have to look at other conflicts of interest, which would probably be political conflicts of interest, right?
Yeah.
So there has to be some sort of ulterior motive to that. And I think there's a couple theories that have been put out there, and I haven't had a chance to chase them down completely. But of course, there's the grooming of the population towards, some sort of digital currency or like social credit system. So if you can start to convince people that, they have to move based on what the government says, then that's some sort of priming for something else. And of course, then there's the understanding that the Trudeau Foundation has stakes in the lipid nanoparticle company called Acuitas. So every time, somebody takes a vaccine, then the Trudeau Foundation makes some money, right? So that would be another conflict of interest, but then coming from a governmental side of things. So we're in the process of chasing down all of those sources, because if we're going to make those claims, we're going to have to make sure that they're bulletproof. So hopefully we'll have something on that with some really good support for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What a situation.
Yeah.
Shall we, Rhain, you got any questions or comments? We'll move into the presentation.
No, at the moment, no. Yep.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, Deanna, let's fire her up.
All right, let's see.
The presentation side of things, and we'll hop in, as we said, if there's like a technical term or something that has confused us. It's like you're explaining it to two 8-year-old gorillas. And,
oh boy!
Every now and then we'll need a term explained. But I think that was the great thing about having you on, is that I think there are probably lots of little details about the COVID care presentation that people are probably like, okay, what now? The relative to the number to the end zone to the We'll pop in a little bit, but we'll try to let you go as unbroken as possible.
Yeah, feel free to step in, because I think that's making sure that as many people as possible have a solid understanding of the science is the best way to dismantle this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
So then they can't claim their science card if you know what they're talking about, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to see if I can. You have no slides. Okay, so what do I have to do? Your computer.
Take a second there and figure that out. Say hi to everybody in chat. We got some of the regulars showing up now. Samuel Adams, he helped win the War of Independence.
All right, so share screen. Share screen.
Would that work?
Yep. Hello.
We're not there yet. Oh, no, I'm not seeing the usual.
See, I've got the technology curse. This is the problem. I'm going to go share screen.
Then you've got like a window, and you can choose your app. There's a window tab. You can choose your app to share.
Microsoft PowerPoint.
Okay.
Allow. Your browser can't see.
Okay, screen sharing was canceled. Make sure you click share on the modal and not cancel. I didn't click anything. One more time.
All right. Okay. Hold on a second. Share screen. Screen share for 2 miles. Screen share. No. Right. Share screen. Select window. PowerPoint. Allow.
Okay.
Technology.
Let me see if there's something I have to do here. Edit my thing. We've had, we just had someone last week doing this, so I'm just going to test something here. If I can share something that isn't. Okay, so I'm sharing. Stop that. And when you share.
Yeah, I'll do entire screen. Let's see that.
Okay.
Nope.
Let's get something.
Can't access.
Yeah, screen sharing was canceled. Make sure you click share on the modal and not cancel. And it's giving me that message, and I'm not doing anything. Oh boy. It's tech troubles. So I wonder what's doing that.
How about I send you my presentation and then you...
We could do that as a worst case, but I mean...
Let's see if we can try and figure it out.
Yeah, Zaruda here that I just put up her. She gave a Ukrainian presentation like a week and a half ago, she shared her browser and web page and everything with us. So yeah, so that's good. By all means, send me that while we're working on this. Thank you, Zaruda, for being patient.
All right. How about I do that then?
Yeah. That's so strange. I wonder if it's a setting on your computer.
I wonder.
So, absolutely sure you hit the button that says share 100% because it doesn't light up. It lights up orange. When I hit cancel right now, then I get that message that I saw before.
Let me see. So screen share. Screen sharing is UK screen there. Use your Chrome. Don't show tips again. Share screen. Allow StreamYard to see your screen. Select it. PowerPoint. Allow. And then the browser.
Oh, it's something happening on your browser.
Okay, hold on a second.
That's a step I don't see. I don't get that allow thing.
Hold on a second.
Okay. Thanks to everyone for sticking with us. The electrifying presentation will start shortly.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, Kyle. Good to see you, man. Good day, good afternoon, and good evening, depending where you're at. Yeah, I imagine it's something different for everybody. We got people all over the world here. Disco Dave, that icon. That icon, what is going on with that girl's eyes? That's really doing something to me. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming on. Anybody watching on Rumble?
I've got a couple over there.
Anyone on Rumble? We're ready to rumble.
Okay. All right, let's try this that I've activated.
Okay. Which browser is this?
Firefox.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. The allow screen thing. Are you on PC?
No, it's okay. Use Firefox. Let's see if that one works.
Okay. Good.
Sorry, guys. This is like totally not my.
No worries. No worries. I thumbed LP's comment because I'm on my phone. Sorry, LP. Oh, Moniker, you're a wild man. Give us some updates, chat, where you guys are at. Surprised all of you survived the coup. We are ready to rumble. We are all signed up. Nice, Saruda. Good. LP, you making steaks? You make a nice whiskey sauce for those steaks, LP?
Avery, can you
Oklahoma.
get set up?
Oklahoma.
Getting set up.
You know what movie that is? Louisiana. All right. Let's go. We'll just keep going through chats. Take your time. TXMF, is that Texas Mopo?
Must be.
Abby's in the background. Disco Dave, I can't take that icon, man. The girl's eyes are crazy. Lived in Alabama. You're getting trashed by the hot tub, LP. Do you mean that the hot tub is trashing you, or you're sitting next to a hot tub and getting trashed? It's an important distinction. Has anyone seen the Canadian COVID Care Alliance presentation on another source before tonight?
I did.
Yeah, I've seen it like
Colton.
8 different times now.
Can you come help me?
Yeah.
Can you show me how to share this screen?
Deanna, I'll put your mic off while you guys are tech supporting. You just turn your mic back on with your little icon there.
No way.
Hey?
Nice. I said Indigos in Sinaloa. Nice.
What's Sinaloa?
That's Mexico.
Oh, wow.
That's like cartel country.
Don't drink the tub water. Or don't start with the tub water. Maybe finish with the tub water.
Yeah.
All right. So what else is going on in the world? We could do something scary and look at my Twitter feed.
Oh God.
See what's going on in the world. See Elon Musk's just leaning right into it, eh? He's not even playing anymore.
No, yeah.
Yeah. He's just like, you're all idiots. I'm gonna tell you you're all idiots.
The mandate's been lifted yet by Moniker? No. Two more days for us for mandates lifted. Some of them anyway.
We're still masks in Ontario. Everything else is lifted. Passports are gone. Masks until the 21st. But unfortunately, Ford left the window open for businesses to decide on their own.
Same thing here. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a really unfortunate thing. I see in Alberta and Saskatchewan, I think or maybe Manitoba, they're making moves to prevent businesses from doing that. But here in good old purple Ottawa, they're not purple, NDP Ottawa, there a lot of businesses are going to go ahead and vote to or choose to have mask mandates kept. I even know some restaurant owners that are going to keep the masks. I mean, are you out of your mind? Disco Dave has seen something about a week ago. Interested in more details. Yeah, that's good. This is a perfect place to be because we'll be able to ask Deanna if we have any questions as she rolls the presentation. I'm ready to get it on. All right, by the hot tub. Are you back, Deanna?
You know what? I don't know if I'm going to be able to make this happen. I've just sent you my presentation. Maybe we're just going to have to do a workaround.
All right, working on it. Rhain, if you do me a favor, keep the chat going for a sec on the screen. I'll get this kind of full screened and ready to go.
LP, we just need to figure out what the hit and win. So Root is ready for the... Oh, missed it. What it is.
Okay.
Root is ready for the mandates to go away. I think, well, people like us are certainly ready for the mandates to go away. It's amazing how many people still want them to remain in place. It's just, I'm just constantly shocked by that.
It is wild. It is absolutely wild to watch it happening. On Twitter, there was a doctor, a big pro-COVID doctor. Retweet this if you believe that COVID isn't over just because our politicians say it is.
Right.
It's like, what? What? It sounds as if it's like religious persecution. Like,
what's crazy
our God is still our God. It doesn't matter if the other guys say he's not there. Our God is still there. Retweet if you believe in God. There's no difference. Where the people that are lifting the mandates are the very people that put the mandates on, and we were yelled at to believe the science, and now so those same medical leaders are saying we're going to lift the mandates, and they're like, oh, we can still have our COVID. Am I right? Like, it's wacky. Okay, we are going to get on to the presentation now. I'm going to do share screen.
All right.
Brave tab. And do we have it?
Hey, there it is. That's fantastic.
Okay, Cool.
All right.
So, yeah, I'm gonna be like the college student working for the summer. You're gonna be like, next slide.
Oh, right. Yeah. You know what? I'm
Yeah.
just thinking, yeah, the formatting might be a little bit off because I don't think you have the fonts that we have, but
OMG. Well, at least they don't have serifs on them.
yeah, exactly. Anyways, it's all good. Let's make this happen. I'm sure we can work it around. All right. More harm than good. Let's do this. Everybody's been really super patient. So let's move ahead. I guess, yeah, that's good. We'll zip past that because we've already covered that kind of stuff and that kind of stuff. Let's move on. All right. Well, let's go back to that one. So I think one of the things that you and I talked about right whenever I got on the call was this whole idea of do no harm. And that is like the foundation of medical ethics. And so the whole idea is that if you're going to give somebody treatment, what you need to make sure is that, first of all, that it works and it's going to do the thing that it says it's going to do. And you have to be able to prove that. And you also have to ensure that it won't do any harm. And if it does do some harm, that the benefits of the treatment outweigh the risk of the treatment for that particular individual. And in the process of informed consent means that you as an individual get to choose. Well, first of all, you have access to a medical professional who understands the data and who understands your particular medical situation. And that person is to act as a resource for you. And then you get to have that explained to you. And then you're in the position to be able to choose if you feel that something is more beneficial, that the risks or that the benefits of something outweigh the risks for your particular situation. And you need to be given all of the treatment options, and you also need to be given the freedom to choose not to be treated, and all of that free of coercion. So that is the foundation of medical ethics. So I don't know if anybody has recognized that maybe that's not actually happening right now. But the way that you're to prove that something is beneficial and not harmful is through clinical research, and specifically phase 3 clinical trials. And so one of the things that you really need to remember as we're going through this is the onus is on the pharmaceutical company to prove that something is safe and to prove that something is beneficial in order to be able to sell their product. And at no point are you ever to be forced to take anything. So if anybody forces you to take something, then that goes against the principles of medical ethics, and it also goes against the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
And so these are legal matters that you're legally owed all of these rights?
Yeah, those are all medical ethics. So that one, the freedom of informed consent, bodily autonomy is the charter protected right that you have.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the ability to choose what happens to your body. Right. And there's other things, but that's kind of the cornerstone. And from a medical ethics point, it's called informed consent, where you're able to weigh the risks and benefits for yourself and individually choose what's good for you. And at no point is any type of collective decision making ever meant to interfere with your right to informed consent. So even if the government says something like, collectively, this is better for us, the benefits outweigh the risks, that should never conflict with your ability to say, you know what, it might be better for the collective, but it should never, but it isn't beneficial for me, and so therefore I don't choose it. So all sorts of lines in terms of informed consent and in terms of medical ethics have been crossed with this particular pandemic. And the bad actors are not necessarily the pharmaceutical companies who may have done what pharmaceutical companies always do, which is try to minimize risk and maximize benefits. They certainly do that because that's just what they do. But somebody has taken that information and then used it and abused it and basically violated Canadians' charter rights and freedoms in doing so. And so that's something that everybody should know, that is a charter protected right of yours. It's called bodily autonomy, and that you have the right to defend because the charter is the highest law of the land. And there are actors who are taking that lightly right now, but they're doing so illegally.
Agreed. I hope we get some recourse.
Yeah, well, I think that you get the recourse that you demand, right? So hopefully we can get a lot of people active, informed to know what their rights are, and informed of the data so that they can make some excellent choices individually and collectively. So let's just keep going here because I know that everybody's having to wait a little bit. Move along. So this is something I was just telling you guys that this is one of those slides that absolutely everybody needs to know about COVID. And it is basically a slide. It looks pretty complicated. I don't know if you guys think it's complicated, but it's basically COVID-19 events, and it's a year's worth of COVID-19 events from March 2020 to March 2021. That little blue line at the top, that's the cases. And those are cases that have been adjusted for seroprevalence. So seroprevalence sounds like a really complicated term, but basically it means that you take the case rate and then you test people's antibodies and you figure out how to adjust that to say, because not everybody gets tested. So the number of people who actually get COVID is much higher than the people that are actually tested. And so as early as the first year of the pandemic, in each of the demographics along the x-axis there, you have different age groups. So the furthest to the left is less than 19 years. And then you've got, the guys in your 20s and the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and 60s, 70s and 80s over to the right. And as you can see, you've got the cases. Even in the first year, there's been a lot of COVID. COVID spread quite widely, about 20,000 cases per 100,000 people, right? So that's quite widespread. And even with that huge spread, if you actually look at hospitalizations, like let's just look at the 30-year-olds, the 20-year-olds, there's like only about 34 hospitalizations and 20,000 out of 100, 34 out of 100 hospitalizations, and 24,000 people actually got it. Yeah. So the rate of hospitalization per case is super, super low. And if you think about ICU admittance, which is the next little bar over, it's pretty much missing all the way up to the fact that you get to your 50s. And then there's a little bit in your 50s and a little bit in your 60s. And then when you get into the 70s, 80s, you actually see some more action. You've got some hospitalizations there. You've got some ICU admissions, and you've got some deaths. But one of the things to really note, in the first part of the pandemic, they were really emphasizing this whole idea of people are dying of COVID-19. And what you actually see is that all the deaths were really limited to the 70s and 80s and maybe a few 60s, but it's really those demographics, the 70s and 80s, where they were dying. This is Canadian statistics, by the way. And if there was this amazing report that was issued and it was basically a Royal Commission report looking at the impact of COVID-19 in the long-term care facilities, and it analyzed where these deaths were occurring, and 81% of them were actually occurring in long-term care facilities. So if you actually crunch the number of deaths for the first year of the pandemic, and then you apply that ratio of 81% were in long-term care facilities, that would leave only 2,000 deaths that were non-long-term care facility deaths. So even in the first year, based on this particular data, this particular report from the long-term care report, you can see that this was really a long-term care facility crisis, and it had nothing to do with the general population. And whenever they actually looked into that, they realized that the long-term care facilities were underfunded for years, and that most of the people in the long-term care facilities actually had no medical intervention and do not resuscitate orders on them because they were elderly. And so that what you have is you have a vulnerable population, you have a virus that spreads via aerosol, you have an under-resourced long-term care facility that can't control the virus. So it's like a wildfire. It just lights up these long-term care facilities. Everybody gets sick, and then nobody treats them because they have do not resuscitate orders. So that's, you get these incredible death spikes.
And you had this instant kind of consensus on treatment, which was ventilation, followed closely by remdesivir, and you had scared doctors and nurses. There are videos of registered nurses who have quit over this, giving details of what life was like in these wards. And it was basically, they've got COVID, they're going to die, we're not going in there. They developed pneumonia, and normally the registered nurse say I'd be sent in to rotate them every couple of hours, move them around, get the fluids rotated in the lungs. None of that happened.
Yeah,
leave them to die, ventilate them and leave them to die in a lot of places.
Well, I think that if you have a no major medical intervention order, then you wouldn't even get a ventilator. They would just leave you die.
Right.
So I think that in those cases, what they would probably do is some sort of palliative intervention of giving you morphine to keep you comfortable. I haven't been able to chase down reports whether that's likely, but that would be the normal thing to do. But I think what we really need to understand is that the reason why the elderly were dying was because they're susceptible to severe COVID, but also because they weren't receiving treatment because they had these no medical intervention orders. Right. 4% of them had do not hospitalize orders, and 80% of them had do not resuscitate orders.
Right.
So if they were going to get really sick, they weren't going to be treated.
Didn't they also recently admit that out of those deaths in the 80 to 90-year-olds that basically all of them had at least 3 comorbidities or more?
Yeah, these people are people who are susceptible to severe COVID, right? So they're people who are elderly, they're immunescent, meaning their immune systems are compromised, their innate immunity is down, and they basically have lots of comorbidities, so other factors that would basically make them more susceptible. So of course, this is the population that we need to protect, and instead, basically our long-term care facilities were compromised and COVID was circulating highly in them and they were dying, but this was not ever a problem for people who weren't in long-term care facilities. So it wasn't an issue for the healthy. So I think that's one of the, everybody should know this slide inside out. And, if anybody starts to say, oh, you deny COVID, I'm like, yeah, you know what? I can deny that we had a long-term care facility crisis. I'm not going to deny that, but I'm definitely going to say that this was not an issue for the healthy. And even if you did have hospitalizations and people in lower age groups, there's this whole distinction of dying or being hospitalized with COVID and for COVID. And our hospital system data is not, one of the things that came out recently is that they noted that about 50% of the reported hospitalizations with COVID or COVID-19 hospitalizations were actually people who were in there for another reason. You're basically getting, your cancer treatment and, and then you test positive for COVID-19 and all of a sudden you're a COVID-19 hospitalization.
Yeah, you're in for a broken arm. They're going to test you for COVID.
If I'm reading this graph correctly, then there was no COVID deaths in anybody under the age of 50?
Yeah, about 50, 60. I mean, they were so low, right? Especially considering so this is, again, deaths per 100,000, right? That's the left-hand side there. But
where is this coming from? Because I can specifically remember news articles in Canada, just Canada itself over the past year where they trotted out people like in their 20s and 30s that had passed away from COVID.
Yeah, so this is March 2020 to March 2021. And these are reported hospitalizations, deaths, ICU admissions based on, their COVID-19 registry. So this is where we're pulling the data. And this is per 100,000, right? So you have to adjust it. Right. This is per 100,000 and there's 36 million people in Canada. So the total number, if you're thinking about that, would be higher, right? But at the same time, when you're thinking about that per 100,000 people, that's really low, 34. And people are in the hospital for all sorts of reasons. And if you test positive for COVID-19 and you're in the hospital, it's not a big deal. So there's a real big distinction between being in the hospital from COVID, for COVID treatment, and being in the hospital for other reasons.
Absolutely.
But so I think that's the number one thing. So the first question that you always ask is, what's the magnitude of the problem? And the magnitude of the problem for healthy long-term care facilities was negligible. People and it wasn't a thing. So I don't know if you can forward the slide, but it would be great if we went on to the next one now. Or maybe that's
sure where Enjneer went. I think he's the one doing it.
Okay, that's okay. Yeah. And anyways, I think just on that whole note, I think our long-term care residents have just had the worst run of anybody during COVID-19. The lockdowns, I think that, this report mentioned that there's a new diagnosis called failure to thrive. And that's basically people dying of neglect in COVID, in long-term care facilities. And that's super tragic. And then, of course, the moment that the vaccine was available, it wasn't tested in this group and they were the first to administer it, right? So they're getting experimental injections on top of being isolated. So I think that these guys have had the worst run of all. And we've got a fantastic video on the COVID Sense site that actually goes through all the data, particularly for elderly people, if anybody's interested in looking at that. But all right, let's move on to the next slide. Let's get to this more harm than good stuff. This is just a backgrounder. So this is a chart that's kind of interesting, and you really need to understand this because they're going to give you this whole idea of the science. You know, we're following the science, and science is actually a kind of a funny thing. And when it comes to making guidelines or recommendations, what you really want to do is there's different levels of evidence. There's different studies or different types of science that you can produce. And basically, each of them are more compelling versus a not. And the only one that you're able to actually prove that something is so, or you can actually use this term causes or benefits or something along those lines, is where it's tested in a homogeneous meta-analysis or a randomized controlled trial, where they control for baseline factors and they control for things like differences in exposure and they control for things like differences in monitoring, which are problematic when you're looking at real world data. So when we're looking at, when they're spouting off these things, our numbers are going up, our numbers are going down. There's so many other factors that could be explaining a lot of that, that any good scientist would basically say that's really interesting, but that isn't compelling, and it's definitely not proof of anything. And so you really need to be careful. So what we want to look at, and the reason why we drilled down and looked at this Pfizer trial, is because this Pfizer trial is the basis by which the pharmaceutical company, and by extension the governments, are saying that this vaccine works. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually go and take a good look at it to see if it's true, because if it isn't true, then they don't have any proof that it works, and therefore they have no basis for recommending it. So that's why we're drilling down and looking at that level 1 evidence, which is a randomized controlled trial. So if you want to advance the slide, we'll go to the next one.
So basically we're headed towards level 1 is the ideal, where you've excluded everything that could just be random.
Yeah, a randomized controlled trial is where you randomly assign people into the two groups so that there's no differences in the two groups that could otherwise explain the actual treatment. So really, ideally, you only have one factor, which would be the treatment, that's different between the two groups. So if you do see any differences between the two groups, then you know that you can ascribe it to that particular factor. In this case, it would be the mRNA vaccine or inoculation.
Right. So level 1 is kind of that's our goal. That's what we'd like to get to on our test.
Yeah, that's the gold standard. And if anybody ever says, oh yeah, follow the science, and they're not providing you with level 1 evidence, then you can basically say, take a hike.
Understood. Okay,
Nice.
Next slide.
All right. So now this is something that I'm super familiar with. This is the design of a clinical trial, and that it's really, really important because it tells you what you can say about the trial and what you can't say about the trial. And so I just want everybody to actually understand the design of a clinical trial. And I don't know if I'm shooting for the stars, but I think you guys can do this.
We can do it.
Yeah, you can do this. So on the left side is a blue box, and that blue box says it's basically a box that's supposed to describe the population that's being studied, right? So one of the things that we need to remember is that the people who were sick in our last figure were who? People in long-term care facilities who were very old and had lots of comorbidities, right?
Right.
So if you want to know if something works to help that group, then you'd want to see them in the study population. So if we actually look at that box there, it says healthy people who are 16 years of age or older with stable medical conditions, no prior COVID-19, healthy immune systems, and no risk of severe disease. Does that sound like our group that was sick?
No.
No.
No. So the first thing that we have to say is, okay, another medical ethic principle is you basically treat to the extent that you can address the problem. You never overtreat, right? So I would never feel compelled if there's a way that I could manage the problem in the sick group, right? So say, for instance, I want to start treating these elderly people and I want to improve their living conditions so that the COVID-19 doesn't spread so much, right? That's a minimal intervention. That's an intervention that I could do that wouldn't apply to everybody else. But this vaccine, they basically want to treat all the healthy people to prevent the sickness in the sick people.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's what a vaccine is supposed to do. And if you're going to do that principle, this vaccine principle, then you actually have to prove that it can stop transmission. Because the only benefit to the people who are sick in treating the people who are healthy is if it stops transmission. And so I'm going to jump to the end here, but the endpoints, none of the endpoints, this study was not designed to measure transmission. And in the actual conclusions of the trial, they basically say we cannot guarantee that this stops transmission. Okay. So right here and right there, by looking at the study design, we should say that this vaccine should never be given to anybody who's healthy, because there's no basis to prove that we will stop transmission to sick people.
Amazing. So is the fault in the at the starting point or at the end point? Should they have selected sick individuals?
Well, so basically a treatment is something that you give somebody who's sick,
Yeah,
right, to remedy their disease. So if they wanted to give this vaccine to people who are sick to minimize their disease, then should be called a treatment, and it should be given to the population, and it should be studied in that population, right?
So essentially, that'd be the same as taking an untested or an unproven new chemotherapy treatment and testing that on somebody who doesn't have cancer to see if it works.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like it's exactly that. So there's a breakdown right away, even in the design of the trials, right? So the sick people were elderly, and it would make sense if you can't treat those sick people, if there's no other intervention, that you might consider vaccinating the healthy people. But the number one thing that you would have to prove before you had any basis for vaccinating healthy people was that vaccine could stop transmission. And this trial was not designed to do that. It was not designed to stop transmission. And it even said so in the actual trial design. It wasn't one of the endpoints. It wasn't tested. It wasn't studied. And in the end, as we went along and started using this thing, we actually realized that it wasn't able to stop transmission. So right out of the gate, if anybody was really a thinking person, they would have been able to say right out of the gate that this was an unethical intervention, because it wasn't able to do, even by trial design, what it said it was supposed to do.
So they most likely, I guess this is conjecture, they most likely weren't expecting it to stop transmission going in.
Well, it's funny because I think Rochelle Walensky basically said, I was so surprised that it didn't stop transmission. I mean, I thought it was going to stop transmission. So I think maybe a lot of people, because, interestingly enough, I think it goes back to another piece, is that this isn't actually a normal vaccine. This is a genetic therapy, and it's an untested, unproven genetic therapy. Like, we haven't ever used gene therapy in humans, right? But it was marketed as a vaccine. And when I say it was marketed as a vaccine, in the sense that it said, hey, look, if you give this thing, it creates antibodies. And if it creates antibodies, therefore it confers immunity, therefore we'll call it a vaccine, right? But if I were to give you, if I were to, purposely infect you with herpes or something like that, guess what? You would react and you would actually get antibodies, but that's not a vaccine, right?
No.
Not by the old definition.
Yeah, they played with the definition, but the traditional definition is, and the basis for mass vaccination is that you vaccinate the healthy so that they develop immunity, so that the disease doesn't get transmitted to the vulnerable.
And most importantly, that's what everyone was, emotionally expecting when they called it a vaccine.
Well, yes. So by naming it a vaccine and by marketing, it was brilliant, because it gave them access to a healthy population, right? But it was never, there was no proof, and they had to write it. And I noticed, because in their discussion, they wrote it up. This does not, we have not tested, we cannot say that it does transmission. And the moment you see that, then you know that they're covering their butts.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
So then let's go on to the next section. So in that middle, not the next slide, the next part of that last figure there. Sorry, yeah. So then you have this R 1-to-1, that's the randomization. So you put half the people in one group and you do it in a randomized fashion, so that, there's no differences in baseline factors that might otherwise explain the differences that we're going to see. And then they give the inoculation. They have one group that gets an inoculation and one that gets a placebo. You wait 3 weeks, then you get the second dose, inoculation and placebo. Now, one of the things that you always have to think about here is that you should always be testing your agent versus the standard of care And so the standard of care here actually is not, the standard of care here is actually not placebo, the standard of care is natural immunity and antiviral therapy like hydroxychloroquine. So that was the standard approach to treatment. And so what they did is that they should have compared the inoculation to that standard, right? So they should have been saying, okay, well, we're going to have somebody over here and they've never been exposed to the disease, so we'll vaccinate them, and then we'll compare them to somebody who has natural immunity and who has been treated, and then we'll look at the differences in how they how they do.
It's not like there was a shortage of case numbers to pick from. You could pick from plenty of people who had tested positive.
Yeah, and so by doing this is called stacking the deck. So what you want to do is you always want to compare yourself to the weakest comparator, right? Yeah. So by comparing yourself to no immunity, right, then you basically have a better chance of showing something. But if you were going to compare yourself to the standard, which is how, the standard way that we've always managed coronaviruses, which is natural immunity and treatment, especially for respiratory viruses, we probably would have had different results. So again, that's like another thing that you would look at immediately when you're looking at this trial design. And then, of course, I'm just going to zip through these other things because we've got some more interesting slides a little bit later. But we're going to look at the endpoint that they used and how they did it. So that it was COVID positivity, which is you have to have symptoms and a positive PCR test. So the way that they used their test and the way that they used the way that they tested and the test that they used basically skewed it so that it had more favorable results. And then again, whenever it came down to what the study was designed to do, it was designed to basically look at cases, and it was designed to look at safety. Those are the primary endpoints. And it had a secondary endpoint of severe COVID-19, but the number of events wasn't actually sufficient to draw any good conclusions from that. So the only thing that we really can conclude from the data that's available is, did it lower the cases or not? And how is the safety? What we can't make any claims about is that it lowers hospitalization, it reduces death, it reduces all-cause mortality or morbidity, and we can't say that it stops transmission.
But those were that sounded like what were the claims?
Well, exactly, but they're unfounded on this particular trial. So let's just zip by. I might move through some. Okay, so this, I don't know, there's supposed to be animation on this, which isn't really happening. That big blue square is supposed to come in later.
Yeah, I'm just coming natively out of Dropbox, so it's probably not going to run. And
It might not. But on the left-hand side, what you can see is this whole idea that you've got an infected individual, which is the blue guy, and they've got a virus, and so the vaccine is supposed to protect it from going to the next guy and ultimately going to somebody, the red guy, that's vulnerable. So this whole idea is a vaccine is supposed to stop transmission, but this one was never able to do it. So there's absolutely no basis, if it doesn't stop transmission, for any policy related to mass vaccination mandates or passports. So in fact, the science says that they have no basis for doing any of those things. So let's
we've been kind of saying it all along.
Yeah, which is interesting. Even though they've got really fantastic talking points, and Trudeau sticks to his talking points like nobody else I know. It's not true. All right, let's keep going. All right, so this is a figure. It's kind of like the one that we looked at the very beginning, but according to CDC, like 85% of the people at risk of COVID are in that older demographic, 75 and up. And in this particular trial, when actually you look at the demographics, only 4% of the people included in the trial were those people. So this comes back to a point of representation. So if you only have 4% of the people are the ones that are actually the ones that need the treatment, and we want to make sure that it's safe in that group, if you only have 4% of them, then you can't actually make any assertions regarding the safety for that group. So after this trial was done and they turned out and said, hey, we're going to give this to high-risk individuals, right? They actually had very little basis to do that. There was very low representation of that group. And therefore, we really didn't know very much around the safety in that particular demographic. And so that was actually quite dangerous.
So to break that down, the people that are most likely to die were the least represented in the study.
Yes.
Right.
So they're the ones that you shouldn't be able to make conclusions, and you shouldn't be able to turn around and say, oh yeah, these guys, we should give it to these guys, because they were barely studied. So that's a huge issue. So again,
Wow.
let's think about our high risk groups. Maybe go to the next slide. So we've got our elderly here, which is one of the high risk groups that they talked about. The next high risk group here is people with comorbid conditions, right? So 95% of the people who died had comorbid conditions, and yet only 21% of people had an existing condition in the Pfizer trial, and they were all stable, right?
Yeah.
And then, the other high risk group that we hear a lot about is pregnant women. Now, there's a principle called the precautionary principle, and it's based on our experience with thalidomide. And the precautionary principle goes something like this: is you don't treat pregnant people until you know for sure that it's safe.
All right.
It's like, don't do it, right? So they don't get enrolled in clinical trials, and they don't, basically they're just like, what, for you, just don't get treated, just stay at home, and let's wait till this baby's born before we do anything. And yet they were identified as a high risk group, and the moment the vaccine was available, along with the people who were frail and elderly and the people with comorbid conditions, the pregnant women weren't actually in the trial either. So there was no pregnant women in this trial.
Is that standard practice for a vaccine, though, or no?
It is standard practice for a vaccine to it's standard practice for any agent not to include them in the clinical trial, because they shouldn't get studied, because it's too high risk, right? You want to make sure that something's proven safe before you would ever give it to.
Right. But what I'm getting at here is, like, let's take the the measles vaccine or smallpox vaccine. So I mean, would they have tested that for years to prove safety before they said, okay, a pregnant woman can take that, or no?
Yeah. So then they wouldn't be enrolled in the clinical trials in the experimental phase, because that's too dangerous. And then they might wait for it to have a really excellent track record and to have gone through all sorts of post-marketing analysis and maybe registry data. So we would do our time to make sure that it's there. And then most of the time you might say to a woman, do you want to get treated? Because we don't really know it's particularly safe, but if you really want it, you can have it, right?
Right. So
you would never,
that's just what we've done.
Yeah, you would never in a million years, based on the precautionary principle, mandate a pregnant woman to get vaccinated.
Right.
That is incredibly unethical.
This would be the first time that has happened then?
This is the first time I've ever seen such an egregious breach in medical ethics.
Wow. Okay.
I'm not, and I'm just going to say that my specialty is cancer research. So I'm just going to say that, like, I'm not an expert in vaccines. I do know how to do clinical trial research, but in terms of historical precedents, but the general principle right across the board is that you just don't do it. It's unethical.
Well, that would make sense.
Because, and the reason is that it's all about quality life years, right? So you have to think about how many quality life years are ahead of something. So if you have somebody that's at the end of life, like a cancer patient, and they've got 6 months ahead, then they might be willing to take a bigger risk in order to get a bit of an extension on their life, right?
Absolutely.
But for somebody who is pregnant, so she's likely a younger woman and has her whole life ahead of her, and then there's this unborn child who has basically to live their whole entire 80 years ahead of them, it's just a high risk situation, right? Mm-hmm. So the precautionary principle would say that you actually have to make sure you demand that it's safe before you would ever go forward with that. Yep. So again, the fact that they turned around and identified them as a high risk group, and then recommended that they get vaccinated based on 2 months of data.
Yep.
Oh, we got to disconnect.
Oh no.
Yeah, she was going into like freeze frame. I was getting worried about that there.
Yep.
Yeah. The most recent Ms. Enjneer, her sister-in-law had a 5-year-old and was pregnant with the next one, and screaming mad at the government that she couldn't get her vaccine yet before they approved it for pregnant women and for her 4-year-old daughter, screaming mad at the government that she couldn't vaccinate right now.
Yeah.
Well,
this is the kind of thing people...
and she's done it. Her kid's done. She's done herself with a baby in her womb, and I was just like trying to find a way to tell her, like, don't let your sister-in-law do this. Please don't let her, like, doing her kid is bad enough, but at least the kid's had a few years out in the wild to develop some strength and antibodies. But I mean, she's pregnant. Do not let her do it. Damn, she's screaming there. Couldn't get to the front of the line fast enough to get shot up while she was pregnant with the baby. Wow.
Well, this is just another example of something that I didn't know. Like, I mean, from what Deanna was saying, that this hasn't been done before. And I mean, something like that should be a huge red flag for everybody with any common sense.
And as she said, the precautionary principle is there for a reason. And it's, you and I even talked about it in early shows in 2021. Thalidomide. Thalidomide is the obvious go-to for how this can go. Whether like, yeah, take thalidomide. What was it for? Back pain or something?
Oh, I don't remember.
Yeah. So yeah, that was a real welcome back.
Hey.
You were starting to go.
I think my Firefox quit on me.
Yeah, you're having a bit of a tech moment over there.
I know.
Yeah, you were starting to go freeze frame, so it was just kind of like waiting for you to time out there. We were talking while you were gone. The most recent Mrs. Enjneer, her sister-in-law had a 3-year-old and was pregnant and was mad at the government that she couldn't get injected right now.
Yeah.
And this is the state of the union basically nowadays, where Rhain had asked if there was precedent, and smallpox, the initial smallpox was very similar to this in that way. You had even after they found it to be dangerous and people were dying, you still had moms lining up to their doctors to try to get it. People were paying on the black market to try to get it, even after the government rescinded it. The big difference now, the unprecedented thing now, is the pressure and the mandates from the government to get it. Once they say that pregnant women can get it, you have to get it. If you want to travel, if you want to work, if you want to eat out, any of this stuff, you have to get it. That's what's truly unprecedented.
Yeah, there's no exemption for pregnant women, even though they didn't even show up in the study at all, right? So then the best data that we have is observational data, and it's not even very mature. Like, observational data means that, you took the vaccine and you entered into a registry trial, and then you reported back your data to, CDC or something like that, and then they analyzed it. But even that data is so preliminary that we don't even know, right? So you're taking a gene therapy that basically, can interfere with, for sure, your mRNA. And now there's data that's coming out that says that at least in vitro, it can interfere with your DNA, and you're giving that to your unborn child. I think, unfortunately, the government came right out of the gate and they had their tag, right? And it's safe and effective. It's safe and effective. Yeah. So that was an unsupported claim, and it's completely wrong for a large number of the people. So, anyways,
you said in the test that no pregnant women were tested at all.
Nope, zero.
Whew.
Zero. So you cannot prove that it is safe or effective for pregnant women, for the frail elderly, for people with lots of comorbid conditions. Even for the immunocompromised. Yeah, absolutely. It's like wishful thinking. And it could be, it's the thinking of somebody who wants to make money or have, there's a conflict of interest there, right? It's definitely not in the best interest of the person receiving it. It's in the best interest of the pharmaceutical company or whatever other financial incentive there is, political incentive perhaps, or even an ideological incentive, because they did charge this whole scene with this, the good person thing, right? Yeah. They demonized the anti-vaxxers and they did their whole virtue wokeness on this whole thing, right? Yeah. So, I mean, they really put all the different pressures, political, financial, and ideological, conflicts in there in a place where it should be, especially for pregnant women, informed consent. It should be the absolute cornerstone that none of us should budge from.
For real. Shall we move on?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's keep going. All right, you guys are doing. You're hanging in there. All right, let's keep going.
Yeah, next slide.
Yeah, next slide. Let's keep going. Okay, so this is basically just this whole idea about the proper comparator should have been natural immunity, but we've already talked about it in that last slide. So let's just keep going because we got a lot to cover here.
Okay.
All right. So now we did talk about the testing. And so this is a really interesting thing. So one of the moment that you actually have an endpoint, the primary endpoint, which is symptomatic cases, COVID-19 positivity, what you have to do, the first thing that you do is you say, is this a valid test, right? So how reliable is the test that you're using? And so what's interesting about the PCR test, so a case was defined in this study as somebody who had symptoms for COVID and a positive PCR test, right? And the moment that we would see something like that, we would say, okay, a test that's confirmed, and we need to know how valid it is, how reliable is this test? And interestingly enough, the gold standard for testing is not a PCR test for this, it's a virological assay. So if they wanted to really truly know if somebody was infectious and that this was actually combating infection, what they should have been doing is virological assay tests and not a PCR test. And in fact, a PCR test was never intended as a diagnostic tool, and it has never been clinically validated for COVID-19, which means that it hasn't, it's like you can say, I think this is going to test for it, but then you actually do all these tests to make sure that it's actually testing what it says it's going to be testing. So for instance, they would probably, if they wanted to validate a PCR test, they would use it to diagnose a whole bunch of people, and then they would use the gold standard virological assay to test the same people, and they'd see how reliable it was. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was never actually tested for that, and yet we implemented it right out of the gate, right? And the tricky thing about this is that it's extremely sensitive test, and it's able to detect even the minutest amounts of viral material based on this process that it does called amplification. So it cycles the material through and it copies it, makes copies until all of a sudden there's enough copies that you can actually detect what it is, in your sensitivity assays. And therefore, you could say, yes, there's viral material from the coronavirus or not, SARS-CoV-2 or not. But the ability to detect the positivity depends on the number of cycles that you use and what cutoff you use in terms of the number of cycles that you use. And so whenever some of the data came out a little bit later, what they found out is that an active infection can be detected at 20 to 30 cycles, right? So if you move the material through, if there's an active infection, you only have to cycle it about 20 times and you can figure out if it's positive. But if you cycle it more than that, if you find out it's negative at 20 cycles and you just keep going, to 36 cycles or up to 45 cycles, you can actually get a positivity, but not based on an active infection, but based on viral fragments from a prior infection. And so basically, you can actually get a false positive when it comes to infectivity. And so again, one of the really tricky things with this is what we want to do when we're looking at a study like this is we want to say, okay, how many cycles did they use and what threshold did they use for testing positivity? And guess what? In this study, they don't provide it.
Oh, what?
They don't actually provide that data in the study.
What?
So they don't actually report that. So they could be using an incredibly high cycle, number of cycles and a really crazy high cycle threshold, and they might very well be detecting viral fragments and not actual infection. And that's a really big concern if your primary endpoint is COVID positivity. Now, I'm not saying that. Sorry, go ahead.
Are they still using the PCR test for this? Because I thought they were supposed to abandon that in January.
Yeah, well, this was a study that was done a long time ago, right? So this is the study that they used to actually prove that the vaccines worked. And at the time that they were using it, the threshold for cutoff was 36 to 45, right? The CDC was recommending 36 to 45. So it is very likely that if they were using CDC standard testing for this particular trial, that a lot of the results that we're looking at are actually not active infections, but they might very well be just viral fragments.
And what was the number that Kerry Mullis himself again said that it basically becomes useless at? It was in the 20s?
Yeah, anything above 20, 20 is an active infection, and then anything above that, anything definitely above 30 is where you're getting into, for sure it's probably not. And this little figure on the right-hand side may be a little bit complicated, but it's got like the bars, like all those little dots are the number of times that you cycle it through. So if you look at the very bottom and in around 20, there's very few little dots, meaning there's no positive results. But if you start cycling it way high, you can see all those positive results, right? The higher you cycle it, the more positivity you have. So it's basically, from a pharmaceutical point of view, and I'm not saying that these guys are the one that did this, but if I were a pharmaceutical criminal, and I really wanted to make a lot of money, then I would basically try and find an endpoint that I could manipulate, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Because if I can make it seem like there's a greater benefit than there is by using a higher cycle threshold.
Yeah.
And I've seen very credible doctors and technicians speaking to the fact that if you're being attacked and your body is exploding with these replicating viri all through all your cells, and their cells are exploding and more viruses are coming out and stuff. Cycle thresholds of 8 to 12 are perfectly reasonable to pick up on this. But the fact that the argument rages so far from 8 to 45 just shows that there is nothing decisive about this test whatsoever. It's a brand new way of approaching something that is probably incorrect, and there's tons of opinions out there. But again, we're only allowed to say whatever it is that's allowed vaguely this week by the YouTube WHO agreement, whatever they've got going on. In the
whatever that is, right? Anyways,
whatever it is, yeah.
So I think another one thing. So in my mind, when our team is looking at one of these studies, what we're thinking is, are the results reliable? And when I get to this and I see that they didn't do a clinically validated test, and that it's susceptible to bias in the sense that they didn't actually mention the number of cycles that they used or the cycle threshold they used for positivity, I would immediately begin to question whether I should trust these results. So we're just going through the process of analyzing a trial. So let's keep going.
Wow. Okay.
So right now we're not 100% confident that their main endpoint is reliable. Now, this is an interesting thing. This is another. I think whenever we were talking at the very beginning, I was saying, I looked at this and I said, hey, this looks like chemotherapy. Well, this is actually something that I would see, it would be an active biological agent. Oh. So, an immunotherapy or a targeted therapy that we would use for cancer, we'd have a profile that looks a lot like this. And I'm going to explain to you why that is. And what we're looking at right now is the solicited systemic adverse events for the mRNA vaccine, but not the Pfizer vaccine. I've got the Moderna profile. And the reason why I did the Moderna profile is it's very telling, because what they do is they give you the total adverse events. They do a cumulative at the very end over here where placebo for 1 dose, placebo for 2 doses, and then the mRNA vaccine or inoculation for dose 1 and then for dose 2. And what I really want you guys to notice on that is that the people on the placebo in this trial are going to be the ones, so let's just back up a second. COVID symptoms are fever, headache, fatigue, myalgia, arthralgia, nausea, and vomiting, and chills. Those are COVID symptoms. Does everybody understand that?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so if you're getting COVID, right? If you have a placebo, you're going to get COVID. You're going to be more likely to get COVID. So you would expect that you would have more COVID-like symptoms, right? If the vaccine is
placebo, yeah.
If the vaccine is going to protect you from COVID, then you would expect to have fewer COVID-like symptoms, right?
Yes.
Right? You'd expect, if this thing is working, that you would have fewer fever, headaches, fatigue, myalgia, arthralgia, nausea, vomiting, and chills, because that's what we're trying to avoid, right? That's why we're treating people, right?
Yeah.
So let's take a look at.
Deanna, just can you explain to me and the audience what exactly is in the placebo? Like, what is the placebo?
The placebos, I don't know for sure what this is, but it's probably just saline. It's a saline solution. It's without any mRNA in it. So it's basically an injection with saline. But what this is measuring is it's measuring anytime you get anything that's like COVID, right? So in the placebo arm here on the left-hand side, a dose 1 and dose 2, these guys got COVID because they were in the placebo arm. There's going to be more people who are going to get COVID in the placebo arm, apparently, right? So there's, in the end, I think it's going to be like a difference of about 80 more people get COVID in the placebo arm than the inoculation arm. So you would expect them to have more COVID-like symptoms. But if you actually look at this, after one vaccine dose or inoculation dose or 2 inoculation doses, look at this, you've got double the side effects for COVID.
Right. Okay, the reason I asked that question is because when I watched your presentation before tonight, I did notice in some of your slides you were showing like adverse events in the placebo trials, including death. And I was like, how is that even possible if it's just a saline shot?
Yeah, well, they're getting COVID, right? So an adverse event is anything that's adverse, including disease, right? That happens during the trial. It doesn't necessarily mean. So here, an adverse event is a COVID-like symptom. But what's interesting is, you know, and everybody in the trial gets adverse events that could be due to the treatment. It could be due to the actual disease itself. It's just an adverse outcome, right? But here, what I think is really important is that it's clear right away that the inoculated people are getting dramatically more COVID-like symptoms than the people in the placebo.
And very predictably.
Yeah, and if you look at the second dose, by the second dose, 15% of them have what we call severe COVID-like symptoms. And those are so severe that they prevent you from carrying out your daily activities.
That's the interferes activities?
Yeah,
interferes with activity.
Interferes with activities is 55% of people can't carry about their normal daily activities. And 15% they can't even, it just prevents your daily activities. You're like in bed or in the hospital or at the doctor's or something.
And consistently bigger after 2 doses.
Yeah, and so then
Wow.
that's 15%. So let's just figure that out. So if you're going to mass vaccinate a population, if you're going to mass vaccinate 100 people, that means you're going to get 15 people who are incapacitated, right? If you treat 100,000 people, that's 15,000 people who are going to be incapacitated. If you treat 10,000 or 10 million people, that's 1,500,000 people that are going to be incapacitated.
Wow.
By administering this vaccine.
That's got to be around the number that's been done in Canada.
Well, in Canada, we would do 36 million, but for Ontario, it's about 10 million, right? So basically what we've done is we've systematically caused 15% of the population, which is about 1,500,000 people, to get seriously ill that wouldn't normally be ill. Because remember, it's only the elderly people that were getting seriously ill before, right?
Yeah.
But by giving this vaccine, we're actually causing the healthy people who had no risk of severe disease to get seriously ill. And the other
so this isn't people catching COVID. This is people having a COVID-like reaction to the vaccine.
Yes. So technically speaking, there was this big, I don't know if you guys remember it. It was like, hey, I think this vaccine's causing COVID. And they said, oh, no, silly, it's not causing COVID, right? But what they failed to say is that it's causing COVID-like symptoms. It just can't be called COVID because it's not the positive PCR test is missing, right?
Yeah. So this is people reporting adverse effects, whether they were vaccinated or not. That's how the study works, and they're tracking whether people have adverse events for any reason, and that's what these numbers are.
Yeah,
they're being broken out by whether they got, when they got their doses, whether they got a placebo.
Okay, so just to backtrack for 1 second then, because I'm still stuck on this placebo thing. So the people who were reporting adverse events after getting the placebo, what was causing these adverse events?
Well, anything.
They could have had COVID, right? I think the most obvious reason would be that they're one of the people that got COVID on the study, and they're reporting their symptoms because they're COVID-like symptoms, right?
But then again, at the same time, it's all the same. You get with a flu or cold, or and everybody's on edge, and
it could be anything.
Yeah,
fair enough.
It's just an adverse effect.
The symptoms I'm fine with. It's the death that I'm concerned about.
But people die. There's 40,000 people in the study. Somebody dies. I mean, it's just life.
Well, let's go take a look at the deaths in a bit. But I think the big take home that I wanted to say here is that if you look at the placebo arm, which is, I think what you can say is going to happen to somebody if they actually get COVID in a healthy population, right? If you look at the blue band for those placebo arms, it doesn't really go above 10%, right? So in a healthy population, the worst that's going to happen to most people is that they're going to feel like, a little bit under the weather, but they're still going to be able to carry about their daily activities, but maybe not to the same degree as normal, right? That's what the blue means, right? But if you vaccinate them, 15% of them won't be able to carry on their daily activities. They'll be dead in bed. Like not literally dead, but like sick in bed. Like they'll be unable to do what they need to do.
You're
right?
calling in sick to work, and
you're a surgeon. You have to cancel your surgeries, right? You're a sports star. You basically have to call in sick. You know what I mean? Like that you can't make the game. Like there's you're a pilot. You're supposed to fly out. You can't fly out. Do you know what I mean?
How long did they track this over?
So this is actually pretty interesting. So this very, granular view of COVID-like symptoms, they only actually measured it for 7 days.
Oh, wow.
So this is another, this is another really interesting thing about this trial is that if you don't watch it, then it doesn't exist, right? So while they measured COVID cases for the duration of the trial and monitored it regularly, right? I mean, maybe not optimally, but regularly, what they did is they basically said, well, just take a quick little snapshot of the safety at 7 days, and then we're just going to pretend it doesn't exist moving forward. And so then they stopped looking at it, right?
That's bizarre.
That is
wild.
No,
it's not bizarre. It is purposely in order to minimize your safety profile. This is a technique that you do, is if you don't monitor it, you don't actually see it. All right, let's keep going. You guys are really good. You're hanging in there.
Thank
you.
All right,
let's keep going. You guys are doing a fantastic job. So this is actually just a slide that speaks to that. So I'm going to talk about a couple really crazy terminology. I mean, let's just look at the figure on the right-hand side. So symptomatic cases plus a positive PCR test, that's your clinical endpoint. And so we're going to get 2 data sets. We're going to get a data set that tells us at 2 months, that was the first publication. And then the second data set, which is what the video was based on, which is 6 months. And during that whole time period, they very actively, carefully monitored and documented everybody's clinical cases, symptomatic cases, plus PCR test, which is COVID-like symptoms and a PCR test. But for the reactogenicity, which was just the COVID-like symptoms, they just did a little 7-day blip, and then they stopped looking.
Is there a missing C in that word? Do you say reacto or reacto?
Yeah, it is a reactogenicity. I'll have to fix that. Thanks for
pointing it out. Just checking. I want to say the word right.
Yeah, reactogenicity, meaning you're reacting to the thing. But it's just interesting that it is COVID-like symptoms that you get as a reaction to the vaccine. Yeah. I think they failed to mention that to anybody, right? It's like, oh, you don't want to get COVID, but you'll get COVID-like symptoms. It's the same thing, but without a positive PCR test.
So this falls into the now cliched tweet of got my 3rd booster, got COVID. Thank God I got my vaccines.
Yeah, exactly. But so what you're missing is all of this data, right? So when we're comparing we're going to compare the safety data, we're going to compare the clinical efficacy, which is this one, the top one there, to the reactogenicity. You have to know that that's not a fair comparison, right? Because one is looking at 6 months of data and one's only looking at 7 days of data.
Oh, geez.
Right? And then whenever it comes into the other ones, which are the severe and serious adverse events, they only measured severe adverse events for a month, right? And they measured serious adverse events for 6 months. So really, again, the comparison between clinical efficacy and safety is not a fair comparison because they didn't monitor it the same way. So that's all I really wanted to say about that, is that they're stacking the deck. Remember, if you want to sell drugs, what you want to do is you want to basically make sure that the benefits look good. So you monitor that really carefully, but you want to minimize the risk so you just don't look very carefully.
Yeah, you'll get a headache.
Yeah, exactly. It won't look good for the bottom line. So let's keep going. Investors won't be happy. All right. So another thing that you might want to do if you were wanting to minimize your safety profile or minimize your risk and maximize your benefit is after 2 months of data, you might declare that your inoculation is working and it's fantastic and very beneficial and it's doing what it was expected to do. And then you could basically ask the FDA to say, hey, can I unblind the trial? Because it's now unethical for those poor people in the placebo group to not have access to the inoculation. And then the FDA, who may or may not you may or may not be paying $2.8 million to review your file, would say, yeah, sure. So that they unblind the trial and they say, hey, people in the placebo group, do you want to go over to the inoculation group? And they'll say, of course, because I don't want to get COVID, even though now I'm going to get COVID-like symptoms from the vaccine. And then they all rush over there, maybe about 89% or 90% or so rush over. And then that only leaves 10% in the placebo group. And guess what? Now you're no longer able to tell if something is safe long-term.
Yeah.
So
on the left, we've got the way things are supposed to be over a 3-year period, the end of phase 3, and you're going to unblind the placebo.
You unblind it.
What really happened was 6 months, 5 months, and they unblinded them?
Yeah, 2 months in, they unblinded it, and it went over.
So July begins, in December they release the report, and they unblind?
Yeah, and they unblind,
That's 6 months, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I guess it's 6 months of the trials going, but then it's about 2 to 4 months of data.
Yeah.
So it's
I see. Yeah.
Yeah, it's about the same. So anyways, then they roll over and everybody goes into the inoculation group. But now you have no ability to say if this is going to cause any damage long-term. In fact, so much so that you've only really monitored anything really closely for 7 days. And in the Pfizer trial, they only monitored a subgroup for 7 days. They didn't even monitor the older group. And then they only monitored, general things for adverse events like unsolicited for about a month. And then they didn't, and only serious things for 6 months. So you have very little safety data. So anybody that's making any claims around the safety of these vaccines based on this data is basically doing so without the support of the science.
Yeah, sheer belief. I mean,
this
is what you rely upon is years of comparison to see if there are any long-term side effects, and it's impossible.
It's wishful thinking at best. I would say we're bordering on religion now.
Yeah. They'll be able to. My favorite hashtag on Twitter is "It's a cult." They'll be able to conveniently hand wave away most symptoms as being COVID. After they've unblinded the placebo group, they say, "Well, if you had a problem, it was COVID."
Yeah.
Wow.
So when we're looking at our 6-month data and we're comparing the clinical efficacy, the benefits to the risks, we really have to remember that the benefits were continued on for a long time, right? Well, there was this crossover, but the safety has been erased. It was minimized based on 7 days of reporting or a month of reporting versus 6 months, and it was erased because they crossed over. So, again, they're doing that to minimize safety profiles. So let's keep going. You guys are doing great.
Thank you. So are you.
All right. So now, again, if we're trying to please our shareholders, and trust me, before this whole thing started, I was one of the Pfizer shareholders. Like, I own pharmaceutical stocks because I know, different drugs and they do really well and they benefit people. So, I had Pfizer stock, and but they're looking to improve their bottom line. But one of the ways that they did it which was really fascinating, and I haven't seen this before, but I thought that was pretty impressive, was that normally what you want to do is you want to follow your initial cohort, and you remember that was adults that were older than 16, and you're following them, and we're going to look at the data 6 months later, right? 6 months of follow-up. That's what the More Harm Than Good video is based on, is that 6-month report.
Yeah.
But what they did was what they found in that trial was that the immunity wanes over time. And in fact, at about 4 months, this benefit that you get from the inoculation actually starts to wear off, right? So they actually reported that in their things. And then they're like, oh my goodness, if we actually have our immunity wearing off, then our numbers aren't going to look good. So what we're going to do is we're going to combine our adult cohort with our adolescent cohort that's just been treated. So their antibodies are nice and high, their immunity is high. And so if we munch those two together and we do a report that has adults and adolescents together, then our efficacy numbers are going to look way better. And that's what they did. They combined those two, likely because the adult immunity was waning and then their numbers were going to look bad. So they dumped in the adolescents and they combined them, and they didn't provide us with independent reports of those. And so if you want to go to the next slide, I think when we look at our benefits, what we have to remember is that we're not just looking at the benefits in adults at 6 months. we're looking at the combined reporting of adults and children. So if we look at this very complicated trial or table on the right-hand side, I'm going to walk you through it because it's really important that you know the tricks that they used in order to be able to say what they're saying. So if we look at symptomatic cases, remember that's COVID-like symptoms in a positive PCR test. At 6 months, the people in the inoculation arm had 77 cases of COVID and the people in the placebo arm had 850. So remember how you were asking, okay, where did all those adverse events come that looked like COVID? Well, that was there. There's 700 people got COVID in the placebo group, and therefore they had adverse events, and it gave, 10% of them had adverse events to the degree where they felt uncomfortable and maybe couldn't do all their daily activities, but it was really no big deal. Only 10% had, what they call grade 2, right? Yep. So is there a benefit to that, to the healthy person? Probably not. Right? Because if they had the placebo, they did better. They had fewer COVID-like symptoms than they did in the inoculation arm. However, their cases were lower in the inoculation arm than the placebo arm. And then they said 91% effective. This is great. But remember, that's because they combined the adolescents and the adults. If they hadn't done that, I think the efficacy would have been, the relative risk change, which is what they call efficacy, would have been a lot lower. But I think the other thing that we need to remember in this is that when they want to really emphasize the benefits of their treatment, they do a relative risk change. But what we always look for is an absolute risk change. And an absolute risk change basically means of all the people you treated, how many people benefited from it, right? So they enrolled 40,000 people in the trial approximately, and only 700 people actually benefited from it, which is about 4%.
Oh. Just to interrupt you for a sec, how stringent is the control group for that, though? Like, what you know what I mean?
Try me again.
Well, let's say that they take 1,000 people and they give 500 the vaccine, 500 the placebo. But out of those 1,000 people, like, are we talking a specific age group, a specific race, a specific nationality?
Yeah, that's actually a really good. Yeah. There could be lots of things. So the key factors that you'd want to do that might influence outcomes would be age, comorbidities, right? Maybe socioeconomic outcome, or maybe some ethnicities, because ethnicities that are, obesity is probably the number one driving factor, and age would be the two factors. So there could be things, but by randomizing them, you pretty much control for those. They're pretty balanced between the two of them. So, but the point that I really want to make when we're looking at the efficacy is by looking at relative risk change, it makes it seem like it's 91% effective, but really only 4% of the people that are getting it are actually benefiting from it. Everybody else is getting it and not benefiting from it.
Mm-hmm. The 91 and the 4%, so the relative and the absolute. So relative risk change is 77 divided by 850.
Approximately,
right?
You have to adjust by the number. It's basically it's the 700 difference. Okay, yeah. So relative one to the other. It's like, okay, well, there's like 77 versus 850. That's 91% different.
Yeah, you can see obviously the placebo was way worse off. But then the absolute risk change, where are what's the fraction that's that?
Yeah, so that's whenever you look at, it's like only 700 difference, but over 40,000.
Right. Yeah. So now
you had to treat 40,000 people to get those 700.
Yeah. So 77 divided by 40,000, 850 divided by 40,000. The difference between the two is 4%.
Yeah, 4%. It's about that. There's a formula, but that's approximately it. And the whole idea is that if your treatment is worthwhile, you should be able to get something like 100 to 98, 99%, right? Like you want pretty much everybody who's treated to benefit.
That absolute risk should look like the relative risk. It should be 90%.
Exactly.
80,
if this was truly beneficial, we would have that up in like at least above 90.
It'd be obvious.
Yeah, but what they're doing is they're trying to peddle their wares. So then they basically emphasize the relative risk change. And in fact, there's FDA guidance that says that you shouldn't do that. In cancer treatment, we always look for the net difference, right? You always balance the net difference, the absolute risk change versus a relative risk change. You have to consider both of them at the same time. And so the fact that they just emphasize the relative risk change is just going to show that they were trying to skew the data.
And really conveniently plays into, it was those dirty unvaxxed. You see that they have, nearly 10 times, over 10 times the amount of disease that us clean vaxxed don't have.
But
that's the stage.
Yeah, but remember that we already looked at the side effects profile, and the people who had the placebo had the fewest COVID-like symptoms of of all of them.
Yeah.
So if anybody's going to be dirty, it's the vaccinated people who had all those COVID-like symptoms.
Yeah.
Anyways, it's all quite propaganda and a lot of manipulating statistics to suit your narrative. But let's go on to the severe disease, because I think that severe cases, somebody mentioned something about severe cases earlier. Okay. So the difference, this is the proof. Oh, sorry, you got to go back one more. I didn't mean to. I meant we're going down the next row, not the next.
Oh, God, sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
You got trigger finger.
Severe cases. You're doing great, by the way. I was boarding those slides. So severe cases is 1 versus 23, right? So remember, we're treating 40,000 people, and we're going to get a net reduction of 22 severe cases, right? And so then they say 96% effective, really? But the absolute risk change is 0.1%.
It's like taking a grain of sand off the beach.
Yeah. So remember how they're going on, get your shot, because, at least you won't have severe disease. This is the data to support that, 0.1%.
Wow.
So again, there's
something.
It's ridiculous. You can't even, and the other thing that you need to look at is for something to be a reliable difference, you have to have a certain number of events, right? Yeah. So this is at 6 months, and there's only 24 events. 24 people got severe sick. So you can't really say anything. You really need more time and more events, and you need to follow this more carefully in order to figure out if that's really a benefit or not.
It feels like it would just be in the noise floor of randomness of humanity. It's barely any difference. But to them, it's a
96% effective.
Yeah, 2,300% more people in the placebo group got a disease or something. Yeah, wow.
Okay, so let's go to the bottom. So now remember that this is a tricky trial, because usually, like in cancer trials, the efficacy endpoint would be like your tumor shrank and disappeared, right? And we're like, yeah. And then, the side effects would be, you vomited and you were tired and you felt sick all the time, right? But interestingly enough, in this particular trial, the benefit, the efficacy endpoint is COVID-like symptoms and a positive PCR test, right? And the adverse effects are COVID-like symptoms without a PCR test. Right? So it's almost the same thing, but the difference is a PCR test. But let's take a look at treatment-related adverse effects. And this is what they measured for a month. So a treatment-related adverse effect is some awful thing that happens, like an adverse effect, something terrible that happens, that the person who administered the treatment says was related to the treatment, that was caused by the treatment. So the investigator says, I think, I shot them up with this inoculation and then they had this effect. I think it's related to the treatment. So if you actually look at that in the inoculation arm, 5,241 people got sick based on the investigator's assessment from the inoculation.
Yeah.
Right? How many? So, and then in the placebo arm, only 1,311 people got sick. Now, remember that they could have had COVID at the time, or who knows what's going on, right? Yeah. So they also can have adverse effects. It might not be actually related to the treatment, but whatever it is. But that's a difference of about 3,500, right? So we're lowering mild symptoms by about 700 by giving these inoculations in healthy people, but we're increasing untoward adverse effects, which are most likely COVID-like symptoms, by 3,500.
And using their relative number they like so much, is 300%.
Exactly. Now, what they like to do, so if you look at this report at the back, they're reporting adverse events as percentages, right? Of course, they're staying away from relative risk changes, because that would just make it look really bad. But what we did is we actually made it into relative risk changes so that we can compare apples to apples. And that's what you should do.
Yeah.
And when you do that, you get a 300% increase in adverse effects with the inoculation. And that affects 18% of the people who are treated.
So your absolute risk, you have a 20% absolute risk of getting an adverse effect.
Which, based on their reports, is likely COVID-like symptoms.
Yeah.
Or COVID
Right.
without the test. Anyways,
Wow.
so then if you want to compare apples to apples, then you have to compare the net reduction of 4% to the net increase in 18%. And if you guys can do math, what would you say?
You guys say we're looking 5 times the risk.
Yeah, more
Right?
harm than good, right?
Yeah.
So then let's go to
Crazy.
the severe cases. We were able to reduce those by 22, which was an absolute risk change of minus 0.1%. But if you look at the severe adverse effects, and severe adverse effects, I'm going to define them for you, is interferes with your daily activity, requires medical care, an ER visit, or hospitalization.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So you have 262 people who got the inoculation that had this severe adverse effect, and only 150 in the placebo arm. And remember that in the placebo arm, you had 700 more cases of COVID. So they had more chance of going to the hospital than the other guy if COVID was serious, right? But in fact, they had lower numbers of people going to the hospital.
Yeah.
It was a net increase of 100, right? So it's a 75% relative risk increase in your chance of getting a severe adverse event, and an 0.5% absolute risk increase of going to the hospital or getting a severe adverse event if you take the vaccine.
Yeah.
So again, 0.1 versus 0.5. Anybody who, you don't need to be a statistician to figure this out, right?
No, and it's I mean, it's not it's just 5 times the increase,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right, and if you
It's
think
still
about
small
it,
numbers, but 5 times the increase.
Yeah, so if they're going on and saying, "Hey, I got my shot. At least I got less severe disease," then we can basically, based on the 0.1%, we can basically say, "Hey, you got your shot. You increased your likelihood of being hospitalized."
Yeah.
More likely. And now I'm going to read off any serious adverse events. So at least, for goodness sakes, this inoculation should at least prevent or reduce serious adverse events, right? Which requires inpatient hospitalization, is life-threatening, results in death or permanent or persistent disability. This is serious stuff. Again, we have a net increase, a relative risk increase, and an absolute risk increase with inoculation. And this is based on their own data. And this is also based on the fact that they didn't monitor the safety people very carefully, and they didn't monitor the bottom 3 rows very carefully, and they did monitor the top 2 rows very carefully. So this isn't even an evenly stacked deck. This is underreporting of safety, and it's already looking really bad using their own data.
For sure. So looking at their label, how did they switch that around? They're almost equal. On their label, any serious adverse event, life-threatening, and they're 21, 26. How did they flip that around to look like that?
Yeah, so what we're looking at is the ones in the yellow.
Oh, okay.
They
I see.
match the definitions. Yeah.
See,
so it doesn't look very different, like 1.2% versus 0.7%. But when you actually look at the fact that it's going in the wrong direction, anybody
why are we taking
anybody should wake up and say, "Hey, wait a second, this isn't heading in the right direction." And again, I really want to emphasize the fact that this is only representing a cohort of patients who are monitored for 7 days. Yeah. And the other ones were only monitored for 1 month versus the symptomatic cases and severe cases, which were monitored the full time.
Yeah.
So this isn't a fair comparison. This is a stacked deck, and it's even when they stack the deck, it still looks worse for them.
Wow.
Was this a different study than the last one? Because I thought we had determined that they brought everybody over from the placebo into the vaccinated group at like 2 to 4 months, and yet this is saying 6 months post-second dose.
Yeah, this is, so then they still measured the adverse events in the 2 groups, and this is what they reported.
But they had long since been unblinded.
Pardon?
But they had
They
long
would've
since
been
been
unblinded by that
unblind.
point.
Sorry, we're talking over each other. Go ahead.
So
Rhain.
this is during the blinded period.
Okay.
So this is just that, this is the 2 months with the follow-up, the stragglers. This is before they crossed over.
Okay.
So it's really not a full 6 months of data, to be fair, because they did cross over, right? So the blinded period was like 2 to 4 months or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyways, I think the bottom line is that they did cross over, so we're not getting that piece, right? So we don't have the long-term piece. And then they didn't monitor it for very long, so we don't have that piece. So
yeah.
it's compromised.
Your treatment-related effects, any severe adverse effects, that's 1 month post-second dose. So everybody was definitely blinded there.
Yeah.
6 months post-second dose, at some point within that 6 months, they unblinded the placebo group.
Yeah.
Okay, understood.
Well, yeah. But I think that this is just the data from up to 2, like during the blinded period, because it would get complicated if you looked at unblinded. But these little 6 month things here are how long they would normally follow these people. Not necessarily that the data reflects that. So that's probably something I should adjust in my slides. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So we need to figure out when they were unblinded and if that's included in the 6 months kind of thing.
Yeah.
But still, even then, it's just more deck stacking that you already pointed out anyway. So
Yeah. And then it says during the blinded follow-up period. So that's only up into the point where they crossed over is this data. You can see it in the little table.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So all of this is supposed to be at least fully blinded.
Yeah.
Yeah. So does that cover what you were asking, Rhain?
Yep.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Let's keep
on to
going.
the next. I'm going to take I'm going to take the vapors. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So deaths before unblinding. So they remember that 2 month period or 2 to 4 month period before they unblinded the trial. So again, we've got healthy people with stable medical conditions, and we're looking at them after 2 to 4 months, right? And in this time period, during this, deaths before unblinding, during the blinded period, you have 15 deaths in the inoculation arm out of 40 people and 14 deaths in the placebo arm. And so the first question I ask, what the heck is happening and why are healthy people dying in 2 to 4 months?
Well, especially from the placebo. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So why is anybody dying now? If COVID-19 was a real killer and the placebo people got COVID more than the other ones, which is what we just noticed, then they could be maybe dying more, right? Maybe they died from COVID-19, but then what's killing the people in the inoculation arm?
Right. Well, from that standpoint, that makes sense because if the inoculation works, they shouldn't be dying. So then just to confirm then this 14 deaths was out of a study of how many people?
So
roughly?
The placebo arm had 20,000 people on it. And they were healthy with stable medical conditions going in, and within 2 to 4 months, 14 died.
Right, but that could still be those 14 people could still be people in their 70s or 80s.
Yeah, there were very few of those though.
Very few. Okay, so these potentially younger people. Okay.
Right. So it's very odd. Why are people dying? Would be the first question I'm asking, and especially why are people dying on the arm that supposedly didn't get very much COVID-19?
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
What's killing them would be the question that I'm asking. Right.
Yeah.
These are healthy people. They shouldn't be dying. They're not cancer patients. Right. So then there's deaths after unblinding. And what happens there is that the people who were, again, in the placebo arm, they crossed over into the inoculation arm. And then what happened is that 5 additional people after they crossed over died after they got the injection, right? Again, within about 2 to 4 months. Now, we don't know if a similar amount would have died on the placebo arm because all the people crossed over to the inoculation arm. But we do know that it wasn't just the 15 and the 14, that after they got crossed over and they were injected, 5 more died, right?
Yeah.
3 participants that had been in the original inoculation arm and 2 ones that had crossed over from the placebo arm died, right? So that's a total death of people who were injected of 20. and a placebo was 14. Now, again, those numbers are really small. They're not a lot of events, so we can't say a lot about it, but we do know one thing is it's heading in the wrong direction.
Yeah, that's still more deaths though than like the H1N1 vaccine was taken off the market after a minuscule amount of deaths reported. It was less than that.
Yeah. And this isn't a placebo-controlled trial too, right? So these are carefully monitored. Now, they're not saying that they were deaths due to COVID, right?
Mm-hmm.
And whenever they actually ascribed some sort of thing, they said, deaths related to COVID, there was only 1 in the inoculation arm and 2 in the placebo arm, right? And then there was all these other deaths.
Yeah.
Right. So what are they dying of and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things, because we know that the spike protein in the inoculation can actually cause cardiovascular damage. We actually looked at cardiovascular related deaths, and we found that there were 9 cardiovascular deaths in the placebo in the blinded period and only 5 in the placebo during that same period. So we know that if somebody has severe COVID, that could cause cardiovascular damage because the spike protein begins to circulate in their circulatory system. But we're also seeing that there's an increased number of deaths from cardiovascular disease. And again, these numbers are too small to make anything conclusive, right? But we can definitely say it's not heading in the right direction. And
that's
it's
what blows my
concerning.
mind. The sheer minusculeness, to coin a term, of this study. Just like these are the figures we got. Like we're talking about 5s and 1s and 2s. Is just, it blows my mind. When I first
this is
saw
like
this,
you have to.
What?
Who are they releasing this data to?
So, pardon?
Like, who is this? Who is this data getting released to? Like a government body or a medical body or just the general public?
Yeah, so the way that this works is that, a study like this reads out and then it's sent to people who make policy, who make recommendations. And so you would have a group that says, I either recommend this or I don't recommend this. And then there was this really weird layer of action that happened with this. And then all of a sudden the government started going all crazy and saying, I'm mandating it. You have to take it, right? They all went all bananas. But, so for instance, the Fauci's and the CDC directors and all these people, they're basing this on this. But then, Rochelle Walensky, based on the interviews that she's given, I'm kind of wondering whether she was just looking at CNN for her cues, right? Like, I wonder if she actually read the study very carefully. And I'm pretty sure, like, I've corresponded with Health Canada, and I'm going at them and saying, hey, this is the data. And when they're reporting back to me, they were just reading the study and looking at it based on the author's conclusions. And I don't think that they did any critical analysis of the study. And in fact, sorry, go ahead.
Did they get any more thorough than this though? Like, I mean, just a death, like they're not giving a cause of death or a reason for death. Like, did they get into that at all or no?
Yeah, the reason for death is in that little table on the left-hand side, and it was in the supplements. And I just kind of zoomed in and I looked at a few of them, but that you can actually pull that supplement up from the study. But the other thing too is that if I'm a pharmaceutical company and I don't want anybody to notice my safety issues, what I'll do is I won't put them in the main report. I'll bury them in the supplements because I know that no doctor has time to look at the supplements, right?
Yeah. No, I'm not doubting. That's what I'm trying to get to is wondering if it's actually even maybe worse than you think.
Oh, it probably is, but I think that one of the things that I'm noticing is like, you look at a randomized controlled trial and you say, oh, look at that. The cardiovascular deaths aren't looking that good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep an eye on cardiovascular deaths in the observational trials to see if there's any indicators, right? So I'm going to say, this is a signal to me that I need to look for something. And then whenever we start giving this vaccine in the actual population, then I'm going to look for people reporting cardiomyopathy, right? And myocarditis and all this kind of stuff. And in fact, we do get reports of myocarditis and pericarditis and maybe other things, right? So then we've got 2 confirmatory signals. We've got the signal from the phase 3 trial, and then we've got the signal from the real world. Then everybody should be ringing alarm bells, right? So what we should do is we look at the randomized controlled trials to know that to prove that there's an issue, right? We can't prove that there's an issue with death because they didn't actually member it, but we definitely know there's a signal with death. And then we look at the real world data and we say, there's another signal with cardiovascular issues and death, right? So hello, let's just pull this.
Wow.
But, because we're in some sort of, hypnotic COVID trance that, they've ritual or something, I think people are missing it. Let's keep going because we've got a few more things to cover here. I don't want to.
Yeah, we've gone over your allotted time, so you let us know how you're doing, and there was other stuff you said you wanted to maybe add as well. So,
yeah, this is the real deal here. So let's just go a couple more slides. There's a couple more things that I think we can do, and then let's go to some Q&A because everybody's been so patient. I'm gonna just forward okay, just going a little bit. So, go back one. Yeah, I just want to say that I looked at the kids data, and in the more harm than good presentation, we didn't have the kids data available. So this is 2 months of kids data. This is the 12 to 15-year-olds, and it's a smaller trial, like only 1,000 people in the inoculation arm and the placebo arm. And we did the same treatment where we looked at relative risk change and absolute risk change, or the efficacy, which is the first 2 rows, versus the safety, which is the bottom 2 rows. And what we're seeing is a similar trend, right? We're seeing that there's more events happening, more adverse events happening in the inoculation arm than we are seeing in the placebo arm.
Wow.
What's particularly concerning to me is in the severe adverse effects. We have 7 versus 2.
And these are children.
These are 12 to 15-year-olds, and this is the data that they use to approve this, right? So although there were 0 reported cases of severe COVID, right? So they're not at risk of severe disease. When you inoculate them, the numbers are small, but they're heading in the wrong direction again. And if you look at serious adverse events, this should make us all stand up and shout. There were 4 serious adverse events. And remember, that's inpatient hospitalization, life-threatening, death, or persistent disability in the inoculation arm, and 1 in the placebo arm.
Yeah. That's
going in the wrong direction. And these kids they're not at risk of severe or serious adverse effects if you leave them alone.
It was never established in any way that there was any danger to children at all.
No, not based on real world data.
Yeah.
Not even showing up in the clinical trial. I mean, think about how carefully they looked for severe cases in this trial, right?
What they used was your kid is going to give it to grandma.
Right, but is that actually feasible if it can't stop transmission?
No.
No.
It doesn't make the remotest bit of sense.
No. So all of it is just BS. Okay, let's keep going. I just want to show you the 5 to 11-year-olds. Let's keep going. Sorry, there's lots of juicy stuff here. This is myocarditis. Keep going. These are the serious types of things that could happen to kids, right? Let's keep going. There you go. There's a little guy. It's the 5 to 11-year-olds. And again, no cases of severe COVID reported, only 15 or minus 2%. They prevented, 15 mild cases of COVID in these little guys, which is a 2% absolute risk change. There was no prevention of severe cases. And again, not that the numbers are very strong, but there's not like when you give them the inoculation, you're actually getting a 42% increase, relative risk increase, and a 1% increase. So again, you're not seeing this. They've got a third of the dose of the 12 to 15-year-olds. So you're not seeing the same adverse event burden, but you're not seeing very much of a benefit either, right? A 2% absolute risk reduction, just leave them alone. They're not at risk of severe disease, and it doesn't help them stop transmission. There's no reason to treat. And so if anybody's on this call, we're going to be doing a letter writing campaign to all the health officials, bringing all of this to their attention. And, we're going to need as many people to rattle the cage and make some noise, because this needs to stop. There's absolutely no, positive benefit to risk ratio for any child to get inoculated at this time.
That campaign will happen through CCCA?
Yeah, the CCCA is doing that. So, okay, just one more thing. It's just a small technical thing. If you just want to increase, there's one little slide I want to show you guys before we turn to quick Q&A. You're doing a fantastic job of advancing my slides, by the way.
Thank you. I try. I am an engineer. It's not just a silly name.
Let's keep going. All right, let's stop here because this is important. Again, when you want to figure out, if you see biased reporting like this, and when I say biased reporting, it's where, you see them cherry picking, minimizing, crossing over, doing all this kind of stuff. And you see them making conclusions like, hey, it's safe and effective, even when it doesn't actually say that. Then you need to look at conflicts of interest. And so what we do is we do a conflict of interest analysis of all of the authors. And so the people who are most important are the first and last author. So the lead author is that Thomas guy there, and he's received money from Pfizer. He's a consultant to Pfizer. Or clinical research is some sort of funding from Pfizer. And what's striking and also very concerning is that the senior author is somebody who has both employment and stocks from Pfizer. So that's a huge conflict of interest. Wow. And the two biotech founders whose stock value about $9 billion were also authors. So these are the people who are shaping the content of this report and this trial, are highly influenced, could potentially be influenced by some major financial incentives. So if you do the total analysis, about 84% of the authors have conflicts of interest. Ouch. Either with Pfizer or biotech, right? So again, if I were analyzing this trial, I would basically say, that could be explaining what we're seeing with this minimizing risk and maximizing benefit business, right? These guys are going to make a lot of money.
Criteria include receiving research money, potential previous employment, association.
Yeah. Okay. So the big box on the left is employment in stock, or employment, or grants, consultancy, or clinical trial research money, right?
Okay, I see how the boxes work now. Yeah, I was missing that visual cue. Right.
Yeah,
I was just looking at the little pointers. Okay, I see.
I know. I wish I could use my pointer on this thing. Anyways, okay. Yeah. So I think that's about it. I mean, there's a few more slides in the video where we talk about all the different legal cases that they're involved in, right?
Yeah.
The Pfizer, particularly, this isn't their first dance. And the other thing. The other thing that we need to remember too is that they're highly networked in with things like the New England Journal of Medicine and stuff, right? So if they've got established relationships, although the New England Journal of Medicine is quite reputable, there's long-standing relationships there, and there's lots of research dollars going back and forth. And in fact, the New England Journal of Medicine chief editor, I think, is the principal investigator of the Moderna trial.
Right.
So
great.
He would be very motivated to make sure that these got a great review, right?
And we had the curtain pulled back when there was the hullabaloo over the masks. There were studies done that were perfectly reputable, published and then rescinded from, might have been Boston Medical Journal.
Okay.
England, the several studies that have come out have been done and show whether it's ivermectin is effective or masks are ineffective, yada yada, either getting published or just simply refusing to publish them, to put them through the publishing process.
Yeah. So there's definitely some bias happening at the journal level, and it's a pharmaceutical-based bias, meaning that things that have big money behind them that are patentable are getting published, and things that don't have big money behind them or that might drive your business, like, if you have everybody wear a mask and you say something like the only way to get it off is if you take our vaccine, right? It's kind of like a reverse incentive.
Yeah.
Then that's not getting published, right? But anyways, I think that we've covered a lot. We've had some tech issues.
You guys
are
a little bit behind.
Probably full. So how about we go to some questions, and then maybe we can wrap her up in a
But
bow.
the chat's been lively with all sorts of topics. No direct questions. You did mention that you were working on something for the future.
Oh,
Another
right, yeah.
presentation. If you
Yeah.
wanted to maybe give us an overview of what that's going to be like, or
Yeah, if you want to move the slides forward, then maybe we can kind of look at some of those things.
okay.
So that's just the public record of Pfizer. You know, this is the whole idea that they've been indemnified, right?
Mhm.
It's like, yeah, you can do whatever you want. We won't hold you accountable.
It's
Fox watching the hen house.
like-
Rhain knows all about that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Rhain's got chickens up there.
hey, nice. Okay,
Yeah.
fresh eggs. So you know, this is basically. I don't really know if we even need to go over all this,
Right.
but you know, let's end this charade, right?
But so
Yeah.
this is the
These
new
are the-
stuff.
Yeah, well, I think this is one of the things that was covered already. But let's just go back to that. Let's go back. This is actually breaking data here, and this is something that is really important to understand. So, whenever they're saying they're relying on the science, there's two types of studies that they can be relying on. One is a randomized controlled trial, right? And a randomized controlled trial is the one that we just looked at, and it's the highest level of evidence, right? And then what they do is they basically turn around, right? They've studied it in the healthy, and then they go and turn around and they're saying, like, we're going to give it to everybody now. And we're going to force them to take it. But don't worry, we're going to monitor to make sure that it's safe, right? And if it isn't safe, then we'll pull it and we won't force we won't make everybody have it. But remember how we were talking about the reporting, the degree to which you get safety data is directly proportional to the degree to which you monitor for safety data, right? So in the randomized controlled trials, they just looked at it for 7 days and they said, hey, look at this, there's nothing after 7 days. Well, it's not that there wasn't after 7 days, they just looked at it for 7 days, right? So it looks good because they only measured it for 7 days. So interestingly enough, there's two types of ways that you can do reporting of safety. You can do active safety reporting. And when I mean active safety reporting, it's mean like, you know, I give you the treatment and I'm like, how you feeling? How you feeling? How are you feeling? And I'm actively asking you how you're feeling. I'm like, are you feeling sick? Do you have a headache? Do you have this? You know, and I'm running down my list of things that you could be feeling. And I'm kind of pestering you, right? And I do it on a regular basis. And that's called active reporting. And lo and behold, when you do active reporting, you get the most amount of side effects reported, right?
Yeah.
So if we look at those little bars there, we've got two panels. On the right panel, it says active surveillance of trial participants. And the leftmost bar there, which goes up to 78%, is the Pfizer Thomas trial, the 6-month data. And the when they're measuring all of those side effects right after you get the inoculation, basically the highest one was about 78% of people got some sort of side effect from that inoculation, and about 5% got a serious side effect, right? A severe side effect when they got an inoculation. Let's just call that fatigue or headache or something like that, right?
Yeah.
But if you basically were saying, you know what, I'm going to monitor you, but I'm not going to ask you repeatedly, and I'm just going to ask you to note down. I'm going to say, hey, if you feel, how are you feeling? And then you just note it down, and I don't tell you anything. That's called unsolicited active reporting, right? So I'm still reminding you that you need to be looking for something, and we're in agreement that you should look for something. But I'm not going to tell you what you're going to tell me, right? I'm not going to say, do you have a headache? Do you have this? So that's unsolicited. And if you do unsolicited, then it's 30% adverse events versus, you know what I mean? So if I bug you, you're going to say it was 78%. And if I don't bug you and I just say, write it down if you feel it, then it's going to be 30% adverse events, right?
Right.
So we know that the true amount of side effects experienced by people getting these vaccines is probably somewhere between 30% and 78%.
Right.
Right? That's the true thing. That's what the data tells us.
Right.
Now, Health Canada basically has this other way of reporting safety where they basically tell you that it's safe and there's nothing to worry about, right? And then they send you home and they basically say, go home. Now you're free from COVID. You're never going to get sick, right? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, you go home or whatever it is. And then basically, even if you did feel sick, you wouldn't know what to do with it. You would have no mechanism to report it. You wouldn't know where to go with it. Maybe you'd think about calling your doctor, and then your doctor may say, oh, it's just the flu, go home. Or he might say, I've got 15 minutes and it takes an hour for me to write up a report to say that you had something happen to you, so I'm not going to bother and I'm not getting paid for it, right? And then even if you did have the time to write a report, like, so just say you did clue that this could be the vaccine or the inoculation, and then you did go to the doctor and you got an appointment in a reasonable time frame, and the doctor did say, yeah, okay, I think we should report this. And he did say, okay, I'm going to take an hour unpaid out of my own busy schedule to do this. Then they would submit that report to, some sort of screening body that would say, I don't think this is a reasonable report, or I do think this is a reasonable report. And then they might deny the report, right? But let's just say they don't deny it and it gets reported. That's the kind of, all of those barriers to reporting exist in Canada. So when you actually look at the total number of people who got an inoculation, the total population, and the number of adverse events that were reported in Health Canada, which is kind of like that middle arrow on the right-hand panel, that's called passive reporting, when you have no system of collecting the adverse effects and you don't even tell somebody that they need it. We're collecting 0.07% of the adverse events. So when the health authorities say, hey, it's safe, what they're looking at is this 0.07%. Wow. But we know, based on the actual clinical trials, that it's probably closer to between 30 and 78%.
Wow.
So that was my question. So that's accurate then, because I heard, anybody who's been looking into this, VAERS, for example, I believe it was the Harvard study that was done that said that anywhere between, at best, 1 and 10% is actually reported. So this number here is we can trust that as being accurate then.
This is COVID-19, right? So let's see, the VAERS report is 0.29. They're capturing 0.29% of all the adverse events versus what the clinical trials say, which is 30% and 78%. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, right.
And the UK yellow card is doing better, but still super low, right?
I've always figured. Sorry, go ahead.
Let's put that in perspective then. And if you look at the VAERS data today, I mean, I don't know what it is, but I mean, the last time I looked at it, I believe it was 15,000 to 20,000 deaths reported. So I mean, in reality, then we're talking like 1 million.
Well, it's hard to say. We definitely know that there's a bias towards more severe cases. Like, you'll probably report more severe stuff than you would. Like, if it's just a mild thing, you won't go to all that bother of reporting it, right? I mean, VAERS has fewer barriers to it than we do, because all they have to do is go online and you can self-report. You don't actually have to find a doctor and get him to spend his money and do a report, right? It's like a little bit more complicated in Canada, but even then it's under-reporting. So the best way to think about safety would be, you look at the clinical trials to figure out the magnitude of the effect, right? So that's 30 to 78%. And then you look at the passive stuff to to color in the lines. What kind of adverse effects are we seeing? So I think that's actually a good way of doing it. If you go to the next slide. So here you can actually see this chart here on the right. This figure 1 tells you all the different kinds of adverse effects that you can get, the classes, the kinds. You've got your 30% and your 78%, and you're coloring your lines, right? We know that there's COVID-like symptoms is going to be part of that. But then we've also got immunological symptoms. You've got neurological symptoms. You've got cardiovascular stuff. So all of the way that they should be doing it is they should be using the passive surveillance systems to give you a sense of what kind of effects are happening, and then look to the actual clinical trials to figure out the magnitude of the effect, right? But even in the passive reporting system, this particular document here is, every company has to do something called pharmacovigilance, which is basically, if somebody calls them up and says, hey, I had an adverse reaction, they are by law required to document that. And then it's called pharmacovigilance. So, this was done in February. So I think globally they'd launched and rolled out the vaccine, and within about 2 months, I think this is 2 months of data, of global data. So it's a lot of data coming in. They had 46,000 reports of adverse effects. 329 pages. I'm just trying to get my numbers right. I think there was 45,000 adverse effects, 1,200 deaths, 25,000 of them in the nervous system, right? Things that they said that they were concerned about were anaphylaxis and then vaccine-associated enhanced disease. And so vaccine-associated enhanced disease means that you give them the inoculation and then they get really, really, really sick. Like they get the worst case of COVID ever, right? And so then they basically said important potential risks of this inoculation are these really serious effects that happen right after you get inoculated. And if you go to the next slide, I want to show you some Alberta data that's pretty interesting. Let's see if you can get to the next slide here.
Next slide, Enjneer.
Sorry.
Next slide.
Okay, and next slide. Let's keep going. We'll keep going. There's one on here. Keep going. There you go. Oh, go back right there. So this is data. One back one more. There. This is data from Alberta, and this is, this kind of rainbow plot is total number of cases on the y-axis, and across the x-axis is time, right? So one of the crazy things about the way that they measured the efficacy of it, right, is it basically says, we'll give you your first dose, we'll wait 3 weeks, we'll give you your second dose, we wait a week, and then we're going to start measuring efficacy. So then there's this time period between when you get your first dose and when they start measuring efficacy, which is about, I'd say about four weeks, right? So it's about 16 to 20 days. And so this plot basically is mapping out the COVID cases that happen right after you get your shot. Mm-hmm. So in the first 20 days, you get this huge spike in COVID cases, and it happens right across all age groups, right? Mostly in the yellow, which is the 20 to 39 years, and the 40 to 59 year olds. So you get these cases, you get this big shoot up of cases right after you get your inoculation. So you're actually getting COVID right after you're inoculated. And one of the things that they're reporting in this pharmacovigilance report is that there's this risk of severe vaccine-associated enhanced disease, meaning that getting the shot actually causes you to get causes you to get COVID-19 actually. But it wouldn't show up in their efficacy because they only measure it after a week after you get your second shot. Yeah. So this is actually pretty sneaky too, right? It's about how you define things.
This was also a double-edged sword in the fact that anybody who would have had a severe adverse reaction after getting their shot wouldn't even have been listed as vaccinated if it happened within the first 13 days.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So that's another thing. By delaying the definition rather than actually counting it from the moment you get your shot, you've got this time frame where, for instance, anybody who got these, between the first 14 days, they basically be categorized as unvaccinated, right? Yes, exactly. And of course, you had all of those incidences where it's like they're like those dirty unvaccinated people are driving the disease, right? But part of that was that people were getting the shot and then they were getting sick. They're getting COVID-19, and but they were being categorized as unvaccinated. So that was definitely another bias.
Oh, look at this. We picked up a true believer here. Check the screen out here. Last first, Deanna is saying that it is extremely safe. 0.07% is 0.007 per 100, which is the same as 7 per million people inoculated. Extremely low, negligible, safe. Thanks, Deanna.
Okay. I'm kind of, Deanna said the worst you can expect a mild headache or muscular discomfort. Thanks, Deanna. Are they talking about the inoculation or from COVID itself?
What slide were we on where we had the 0.07%? Things that you come in late there last first. You needed to come in on time on the right slide there. So we got a true believer. We have a habit of picking up a couple of these, and we welcome them. This is what it's all about, right? But in that slide, that's the relative versus absolute stuff, right?
Okay, why don't we go back and just check it out?
Yeah, where were we where we had the 0.07? Let's clear that up because there we go. Is that the 0.07 you're talking about with the one?
I'm not sure. Last
The
first
one
when
severe adverse in children that were inoculated, and the one in the placebo group.
Yeah.
And we're supposed
So
to draw.
that's yeah.
We can't draw any conclusions from it.
No, I don't think so. So basically what they're saying is that the adverse events are minimal, which I would agree with, but they're more than not giving it to them, right?
That's right. It should be basically a complete difference.
Yeah, and the other thing too is that if they have no severe cases, then then the principle, the medical ethical principle is don't treat, right?
Yes.
If they're not benefiting.
Yeah, and with the kids, we went so far beyond that.
Yeah. Anyways, I think this is where we were, but I think that's pretty much all that we have to cover. Think there's a lot there, and
we're at 22:11. We've gone a bit over. We appreciate you sticking around.
Yeah, well, sorry about all the technical difficulties. Next time I'm going to go a walkthrough. I was told, oh no, it's going to be really easy, and I was like, okay, maybe I can do it, but it's that tech curse, I tell you.
Yeah, just some kind of browser permission thing you got to look at there. That's about it. I'm surprised you haven't hit all the problems yet. I've seen you on. It has to be 22 streams. I've probably seen you on.
I know. Well, exactly. I often have support that I didn't have tonight, so maybe that was it. Anyways, great to chat with you guys.
Thank you very much for coming on. We're such a small channel. It was an honor to have you even come on, and we appreciate it. And we're happy to be spreading this information, even though we'll get banned.
Hey, all right. Well, let's do it with
we know we'll get banned. That's right, and get everybody over to Rumble.
All right.
Okay, thank you very much, Deanna.
Take care. Great to talk to everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good night.
Nice to talk to you. Okay. Good night.
All right. We're post-show times now.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Last first, so you have enhanced immunity quickly after. Are you trolling last first?
I don't think she said that.
No, I think it's a true believer that we've got in here. And it's just wild to see, unless you're just trolling and playing around. If you're being ironic, then good one. Yeah. But even though the sound of it is really quite atrocious, pharmacovigilance. That was on one of the earlier slides, pharmacovigilance. I put into chat that's the new word of the week for the super spreaders.
Yeah. Well, she was talking about the conflict of interest there too, and I mean somebody just reported this past week that article I flipped there about the Trudeau Foundation owning or having 40% of a company that makes the nanolipids for.
So that article claimed to verify that the Trudeau Foundation owns a 41% stake. Is that what it said?
40%.
40% stake in Acuitas?
Acuitas,
or Arbutus, yeah.
Acuitas, however you pronounce it, yeah.
That's exactly what, what's his name? That American doctor, that fucking bow tie doctor. What's his name? Oh, I'm blanking right now because I haven't watched him in like a month. I was selling him to chat big time.
Moore?
The bald American with a bow tie.
That's Moore, isn't it?
Not Moore. I'll think of it in a second when I'm not trying to think of it. Yeah. Remember to keep your mask close and your booster close. They're okay, last first. You enjoy your COVID for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
We're going to be breathing on you.
Yeah, I wish we could have had her on for a little bit longer. There was some stuff I definitely wanted to ask her, but oh well.
It was preordained and we knew we'd run out of time. There's just so much to cover. But still covered the meat of the matter, got to clarify a few of the technical kind of data, clinical analysis things that confused me a bit when I would see the presentation before. It's a lot clearer for me now anyway. And everyone watching, you just do Deanna McLeod or Canadian COVID Alliance into, well, not YouTube, into Rumble. And you can see this presentation everywhere. And this is the presentation that all Robert Malone did was share a link to this presentation, and that's what they banned him for.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a couple of people watching them, 4 or 5.
Yep. Kind of the usual kind of a 30-ish concurrent split now with a few on Rumble and a few here. And that's all good. As usual, it'll be 40 or 50 times that actually view this in the coming days. Yeah. And that's great. More people will see this and learn some stuff about how incredibly screwed we are.
Yeah. That was a good show, though. It was good.
It was.
Even with the
Thank you, Roger.
It was great. Great show.
Darren, yeah, you got it right there. So, I mean, we're talking about 44,000 people and 700 people benefited. But even then, it's like, yeah, kind of, maybe, because it's a shitty test and the symptoms are the same as a cold or a flu. So it's still like, kind of WTF, right?
Oh, I still have to wonder how randomized this test and study really was to begin with. I mean, if they're willing to completely fudge the numbers the way they did, then who's to say they're not willing to fudge that? You know?
Yeah. Well, I think like I think they protect themselves by they do what they say they're going to do, but what they say they're going to do is set up from the start to make the product look good. So they don't need to go and just like with an eraser and change data. Everything's set up right from go, from decades of experience. Everything's set up from day one to succeed and prove that their vaccine is the best thing that's ever happened to humanity. And they knew exactly how to set up the test exactly wrong enough to get the exact right result.
Right.
That's how that's what my takeaway from it. They tested like the wrong groups of people. They tested too few people. They tested them for not long enough. Then they unblinded the placebo group. And now they're going for their 7th or 8th emergency use authorization from the FDA to get a 4th booster for people without doing any further testing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Well, they've offloaded testing to us. We're now testing for them. There's no test.
Oh, they're not even keeping track of that.
No, like the government and us are supposed to count now what's going on. But don't you dare count the VAERS numbers, because that's all bullshit.
Yeah, but from what she was saying, it sounded like they're not even keeping track of that anymore.
That's what I'm saying. They've offloaded it to us. Now we're just supposed to look around and check to see if people are dying, like, you know, and there's no test anymore. There's no nothing anymore.
I know.
So, you know, wow.
But if you actually do that, you know, I mean, this is what boggles my brain. Like, I mean, you know, I know enough people. I don't know that many people, but I know enough people to know that I'm getting stories every week about people coming down with this or coming down with that or having this weird reaction or this or that weird reaction. And they're all vaccinated. Who knew? Like, I mean, it's just it's a pandemic of strange illnesses and diseases and deaths is what's been happening since this vaccine war. I mean, it's
all the athletes dropping dead on the fucking pitch. That's like no, nothing to see here, you know. Fucking mostly peaceful protests.
Yeah.
Fucking just beyond.
It's all normal, I guess.
Yeah, Moniker, do rewatch. What I'm doing now with these shows. We learned from having Zaruda on with Ukraine is to clip them up. So I'll take our show and I'll clip it up into chunks, either by topic or just nice little unbroken sections of Deanna, and I'll upload clips, kind of like Joe Rogan does, except they'll be longer because we'll deal with whole topics. I did that with Zaruda's Ukraine stuff. So if you go to the channel now, you can see that there are multiple clips of Zaruda's interview, and I'll do the same with Deanna over the next few days, and we'll get condensed chunks that are much more watchable and shareable. TGA Mendoza, hey man, this makes me livid but not surprised, pathetic, and all the emojis. Yeah, you know, it's we were talking pre-show about this, getting to know Deanna for a bit, and Rhain and I, when this pandemic started, we were just like, wow, this is bullshit. This is just going to be total bullshit. It's going to be
Well, that's one of the things
Here we go.
That's one of the things I wanted to ask her was if you think back to when this first started, the whole reason I got into this was with our Flipboard magazine, and we started flipping articles simply based on here's a COVID symptom. And I mean, we were getting everything from brain fog to erectile dysfunction and everything in between. It was like, how is this even fucking possible?
Erectile megafunction.
Like since when in the history of flu viruses, and that's all this is, it's a coronavirus, it's a flu virus, has caused any of these things? Like never.
Yeah.
You know? That I wanted to ask her about. It's like, what do you make of all these so-called side effects of COVID? Like, it just doesn't even make any sense. Like, how do you get myocarditis from a flu virus? Like, respiratory problems, sure, but heart problems? You know, neurological problems,
erections. There was taste, blind, everything. It was something new every single day. There was something else that COVID could do.
I know.
It was ridiculous, and that's what started us on this journey. We started a Flipboard to share stories and laugh at the ridiculous things they were claiming about it, and then we decided to make a YouTube channel. Mm-hmm. Then, luckily, the truckers happened, and that really accelerated things.
Yeah,
but yeah, we were 100% ready for this TGA, so we're not surprised, but still just as angry as ever. It's still just as outrageous that this happened and they've gotten away with it. It's bloody crazy.
Yeah.
Zeruda, we can see that people are dying from the vaccine. All you have to do is look at the overall deaths in 2020 and 2021 vaccine. Yeah. There were no excess deaths. 2019, 2020. I think the end of 2021 started to show some. And but yeah, there's supposed that people are dropping like flies from this disease, and there's no excess deaths. I mean, that's one of the simplest.
The best. I don't know if you saw this one. My buddy was telling me today that another wrestler died. So it was what the hell was his name? I forget. Anyways, he was 63 years old. But anyway, he had a hip. They blamed it on complications due to his hip surgery. So I thought, okay, well, fair enough. I mean, I guess that can happen. But I went and read the actual article. So it said that his hip surgery was a month ago, and this past weekend he suffered 3 heart attacks, and that's what killed him. So I'm like, how the hell do you suffer 3 heart attacks like a month after hip surgery? Like maybe, I guess it's within the realm of possibility. It's within the realm of possibility. It is. It's within the realm of possibility, but still, it seems fishy as fuck.
Well, there's Zeruda saying celebrity deaths are up 4 times. I wonder if we can get celebrity deaths up to 20 times. That'd be nice.
That'd be nice.
Get rid of the whole cast. Get rid of the whole cast of the series. We'll start over with the new cast. Population of the world is about to plummet. Maybe. We'll see. There's no guarantee these fuckers are going to win. There's no guarantee these fuckers are going to get away with it. It isn't. I mean, they've been trying stuff like this for. Depends on how wide you cast your net and when you start.
Oh, we lost Enjneer. Where did he go? There he is. The truth of the matter is, I mean, we don't, as far as world population goes, I mean, we don't even know. The world population numbers could be plummeting right now as we speak, and nobody's reporting on it. Like,
and the number,
who knows how many?
And even there, the numbers are probably not that accurate. I would think they feed us these numbers every few years. It goes up, it's at 7 billion now and whatever. But I mean, how accurate is it really? But that's not the point. No, I'm not sure that they're going to succeed with this, at least this leg of it right now. They've made a chess move, and it seems that there are other players trying to make their chess moves. Some might be more evil than the people taking their turn right now. Some are probably much nicer, and they're like the white pieces on the board, and they are actually fighting these players. So there's no guarantee that it's all over, or there's no need to go full black pill right now, because these guys would have succeeded long ago. You know, their first real shot at this was World War One, right?
Right.
They made an end run from, you go from World War One through the Treaty of Versailles, the League of Nations, which failed, into the Great Depression, which got, didn't achieve the ultimate goals that they wanted. They've been going for one world government, one world currency for well over 100 years. So there's no guarantee they're going to win this time. It's just that they are getting better at it. They are getting smarter at it, this faction. Yeah. Again, I recommend to everyone Matthew Ehret. He just find his Substack, Matthew Ehret's Substack. Great little kind of, you can read in about 15, 20-minute articles on the Fabian Society. Extremely important. Kind of overlooked a lot nowadays. The Fabian Society is like a whole bunch of eugenicist, Darwinist assholes getting together in the 1800s and have evolved all the way through to, it's them pushing the World War I thing, Kissinger, Round Table, all this stuff comes from the Fabian Society. And so I want to make a video on it. I think it's something that we should cover, because, I mean, seems like these assholes are really, this is like the people taking their chess move right now. And I'm hoping they jump the gun, and I'm hoping that they don't win. They didn't win any of the other moves, but they made gains, huge gains.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. We'll have to see. But yeah, Matthew Ehret, I'm going to put his name in chat again, because everybody's got to be listening to this guy. He's this Canadian historic genius. And I'm just scratching the surface on what the guy has to cover. Basically, it's one of those, like, everything you thought you knew was wrong. And even someone like me and Rhain, who really go looking for the alternate histories in life, this guy still blows my mind. After 50 years of being on this earth, this guy's still like, I'm like, what? Huh? What? Yeah, and you look up, you verify the stuff that he says, and it's friggin' true, right? Like, Canada's a royal empire bulwark. It's been fighting America since they separated, and like plotted to kill Lincoln. The plot all happened in Montreal. The same night, it's not known, they tried to kill the Secretary of State of America as well, stabbed 18 times. The only reason he survived was because a month earlier they tried to push him under a fucking carriage and broke every bone in his body. So he was in a body cast, which back then they put on with iron. So they stabbed the Secretary of State the same night 18 times, and he lived. And this is the same people.
Body cast of iron.
Yeah. There's a song there, Rhain. He survived the previous assassination attempt, and Lincoln was truly like a Republican renegade. Made the greenback forcibly against fiat currency and national banks and stuff like this. It's endlessly fascinating. Anyway, find Matthew Ehret. Listen to anything the kid has to say. I'm sending the guy a message every week trying to get him on the show, because he's still appearing on shows that only get about 1,000 views, kind of where we're at. So I'm hoping we can get him on. He's just he's like a firework of history.
Right. Yeah, it'll be interesting.
Yeah, he's something else. You guys, a dude named Spaceman on AM radio.
Never heard of him.
No, I don't think so. Spaceman was dialed in deep. All right. Well, maybe that's something we can look up. Maybe Spaceman knew something we didn't. Something from outer space. All right. I think we're about ready to call it a night there. I'll do clips of this over the next few days, and we'll have that up for you guys a little bit more shareable. And yeah, we'll go from there. After this, we're working on our next guest and our next topic for some short videos to put up. So you guys stay tuned. Everybody, please, anybody that watches this, go over to Rumble, SuperSpreaders, easy to find. Search channels for SuperSpreaders. You'll find us right away, and sub up over there because, I mean, they're going to nuke us for this video. So everyone, please head over to Rumble and sign up there. We're on Odysee, Bitchute, we're everywhere. So just sign up wherever you find us and make sure that you can stay in contact in the future because, I mean, we've had one takedown. The next one will be a strike, and we won't be able to do anything for a week. So make sure you got us on Rumble, guys. Alrighty. Mr. Rhain, any closing comments?
All right. No, Roger looks like he's saying Jordan Peterson. I don't know if he means we should try to get him on the show. Sure, I'm game for that.
Well, I'll try. We're a little bit below his threshold, I think.
Yeah,
we're like something you clean out of his fingernails. TGA, thanks a lot. Yeah, please, yeah. TGA, head over there right now. Deanna's off the show, so I mean, there you go. It's that way everywhere. We're just super spreaders everywhere. Can't believe no one else thought of our genius name before. Zaruda working on part 2, dealing specifically with the Nazi element in the Ukraine. Excellent. So we got to get Zaruda back. Zaruda, you have your own playlist now on our channel. Anyone can go to our channel, look at our playlists, and see the Ukraine history with Zaruda playlist and watch the snippets of only the information that she gave and none of the farting around and joking and stuff that we did. Just the info. Very linkable, searchable, shareable.
Yeah.
All right, guys. We're going to call it a night.
Are we going to do just a regular video if we don't get a guest, or like,
exactly,
and upload
that? Fascinating content is guaranteed. Something every week from us, whether it's live or edited. All right, kids.
Perfect.
Thank you, everyone, for showing up.
Yep. Have a good night.